The snow fell silently outside the funeral home windows as I watched my sister Rebecca stand at our father's casket, dabbing her eyes with a silk handkerchief that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. My name is Maya Collins, and this was the day my sister began her plan to take everything that should have been mine. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Thomas would have wanted Collins properties in capable hands, Rebecca announced to our small gathering of family and close friends, her voice carrying that practiced tone of authority she'd perfected over years of charity galas and board meetings. As the one who stayed by his side in the business all these years, I'll ensure our family's legacy remains intact. I gripped the edge of my seat, knuckles turning white. Just yesterday, we'd laid our father to rest, and already she was making her move. Mom sat beside me, her grief-stricken face buried in tissues as she nodded along to everything Rebecca said. "Maya, dear," Rebecca's saccharine voice cut through my thoughts as she turned to face me directly. "You understand, don't you? With your unconventional choices, this is really for the best." She gestured vaguely in my direction. "All that time in Cambodia when Dad needed you here." The gathered mourners turned to look at me, and I felt their stares burning into my skin. I knew exactly what they were thinking. The rumors Rebecca had carefully cultivated during my 2-year absence. The irresponsible younger daughter who abandoned her family responsibilities to find herself overseas. What they didn't know was that I'd been establishing education programs for children in rural villages, working 18-hour days while video conferencing with Dad whenever possible. "I understand perfectly," I replied, keeping my voice steady despite the rage building inside me. "You've always had everything figured out, haven't you, Rebecca?" She smiled that picture-perfect smile that had graced the covers of Chicago Business Monthly 3 times in the past year. "I'm so glad you see it my way. Mom's already signed over power of attorney to me. It's all very official." My head snapped toward Mom. "Is this true?" Mom finally looked up, her eyes red and puffy. "Becca knows what she's doing, honey. She's been working with your father for years. She knows all the investors, the partners. Dad would have wanted us to share everything equally," I interrupted, standing up. "That's why his will stated we would be co-executors." Rebecca's husband, Jason, stepped forward, placing a manicured hand on my shoulder. "Maya, sweetheart, maybe you should step outside and get some air. Grief can make us say such irrational things." I shrugged his hand off and walked toward the funeral home exit. As I pushed open the heavy wooden doors, I heard Rebecca's voice carry across the now silent room. "You're better off without the responsibility, little sister. Trust me." That night, I sat in my childhood bedroom at Pinecrest Manor, surrounded by boxes I'd already packed. The estate had been in our family for 3 generations, a sprawling Tudor-style home with 10 acres of gardens that my father had lovingly expanded and improved. Now Rebecca would control it all. A soft knock at my door made me look up. Mom stood there looking smaller than I'd ever seen her. "I'm sorry, Maya," she whispered. "But Becca, she knows what she's doing. She says she's got everything planned out. She's manipulating you, Mom. Can't you see that?" "Don't make this harder than it needs to be," Mom's voice cracked. "Please, I can't handle any more conflict right now." I stood up and hugged her, breathing in her familiar lavender scent. "It's okay, Mom. I understand." And I did understand. Not just Mom's grief, but what I needed to do next. Rebecca thought she'd won, thought she'd pushed me aside like she always had. But she'd made one crucial mistake. She'd underestimated me. Again. Later, that night, as I loaded the last box into my rental car, I heard heels clicking on the driveway behind me. "Running away again?" Rebecca called out. "I knew you'd take the easy way out." I turned to face her, and for the first time in years, I felt completely calm. "No, Rebecca, I'm not running away. I'm moving forward." She laughed, the sound echoing in the empty driveway. "Forward to what? Another volunteer project? Another finding yourself adventure?" You know what's ironic about all this? Dad kept hoping you'd come back and take a real position in the company. "Is that what he told you?" I asked, closing my trunk. "It doesn't matter now," she said with a dismissive wave. "I've secured everything. The board supports me, Mom trusts me, and you've shown everyone exactly who you are by running off again." "You know what's funny?" I smiled, unlocking my car. You're so focused on what you've gained, you have no idea what you've just lost." "Lost?" she scoffed. "I've won everything. Keep telling yourself that." I got into my car and started the engine. Through the window, I added, "And Rebecca, remember this moment. Remember exactly how it feels to think you've won. It'll make what comes next so much sweeter." As I drove away from Pinecrest Manor, I watched Rebecca's figure shrink in my rearview mirror. She thought she'd written the final chapter of our story, but she was wrong. This wasn't the end. It was just the beginning, and I was going to make sure she regretted every single moment of her victory. 4 months into my new life in Chicago, I found myself sitting across from Ethan in his downtown office, surrounded by financial reports and property assessments. The view of Lake Michigan behind him seemed to highlight how far I'd come from the security of Pinecrest Manor, but I wasn't there to admire the scenery. "You're catching on quick, Maya," Ethan said, adjusting his glasses, as he reviewed my latest property valuation analysis. "Most people take years to develop this kind of eye for real estate potential." I took a sip of my coffee, hiding my smile. Most people aren't trying to save their family legacy from a manipulative sister. Speaking of which, Ethan turned, his computer screen toward me. "Have you seen the latest announcement from Collins Properties?" The headline made my stomach turn. Collins Properties announces aggressive expansion into luxury condos. Below it was a photo of Rebecca in her signature pearl necklace and practiced smile, standing in front of the community garden site that Dad had purchased for his final project. "She's developing the Westlake Community Gardens site," I muttered, scanning the article. "Dad bought that land specifically to create affordable housing with green spaces. This luxury condo plan goes against everything he believed in." "Exactly," Ethan leaned back in his chair. "And from what I can tell from the public filings, she's taking out loans the company can't possibly support with current cash flow." A knock at the door interrupted us. A tall woman in a crisp suit entered, her presence immediately commanding attention. "Sorry to interrupt," she said, her eyes meeting mine. "I'm Natalie Wong. I couldn't help overhearing. Did you say Collins Properties?" I straightened in my chair. "I did. I'm Maya Collins." Recognition flickered across her face. "Maya Collins. I've been following your family's case. The inheritance dispute?" "You could call it that," I replied carefully, though theft might be more accurate. Natalie pulled up a chair, her interest piqued. "I'm an attorney specializing in estate disputes. I've seen similar cases before, but yours. There's something not quite right about how it was handled." Ethan cleared his throat. "Natalie's one of the best in the business, Maya. If anyone can help you build a case, it's her." I studied Natalie's face, looking for any sign of the usual condescension I'd faced when telling my story. Instead, I found genuine concern and something else: determination. "Tell me everything," Natalie said, pulling out a notepad. "Start with the power of attorney transfer." For the next hour, I laid out every detail of Rebecca's manipulation: the hasty funeral announcement, the pressuring of our grieving mother, the systematic exclusion of me from all family business decisions. "Your sister's making mistakes," Natalie finally said, tapping her pen against the notepad. "Big ones. These development plans for the community garden site, They directly contradict your father's expressed intentions in his preliminary estate planning documents. Can we prove it? I asked, trying to keep the desperation out of my voice. Not yet, but we can start building a case. Ethan's been teaching you real estate valuation, right? That knowledge will be crucial. I glanced at my watch and stood. Up. I have a meeting in 30 minutes with a former board member who worked with my dad. You're building quite the information network. Natalie looked impressed. Rebecca's biggest argument was that I lacked the knowledge and connections to run Collins Properties, I replied, gathering my things. I'm making sure that when I face her again, she won't have any ammunition left. Natalie stood as well, holding out her business card. Let's meet next week. We'll need to start documenting everything. As I reached for the card, our fingers brushed briefly. The contact sent an unexpected jolt through me, and I quickly pulled away. Thanks, I mumbled, shoving the card into my bag. Both of you. I know this isn't exactly a normal client situation. Ethan waved off my thanks. Normal is overrated. Besides, watching you take down your sister will be payment enough. Outside, Chicago bustled with its usual afternoon energy as I waited for my rideshare. My phone buzzed with a text from Mom. Rebecca's hosting a charity gala next month for the new development. Please come home for it. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. We miss you. I stared at the message, my throat tight. Below it was a photo of Mom and Rebecca at Pinecrest Manor, standing in front of Dad's rose garden, his pride and joy that he'd spent decades cultivating. Even from the small photo, I could see the roses were already wilting without his care. Another text came through, this time from Natalie. Forgot to mention, those charity galas are perfect for gathering intel. Might be worth making an appearance. I smiled, typing back, already got my invitation. The rideshare pulled up, and as I settled into the back seat, I pulled out my tablet to review my notes from the meeting with Dad's former board member. Every piece of information I gathered, every relationship I rebuilt, was another step closer to taking back what was rightfully mine. Rebecca thought she'd won by forcing me to leave, but she'd actually given me exactly what I needed. The freedom to become someone she'd never see coming. The sister she'd dismissed as irresponsible was gone. In her place was someone much more dangerous, someone with nothing left to lose and everything to gain. What Rebecca didn't know, what nobody knew, was that I had received a letter too, days before returning from Cambodia. A letter from my grandmother Eleanor, who had passed away just 3 months before Dad. A letter that had been held by her attorney, with instructions to deliver it to me directly upon my return to the States. A letter that would change everything. I hadn't opened it yet. Something told me to wait for the perfect moment. As the Chicago skyline passed by my window, I knew that moment was coming soon. Very soon. The coffee shop near my apartment had become my unofficial headquarters over the past weeks. I spread the property assessments across the table, careful to avoid the small puddle of spilled latte. Each document represented a piece of Collins Properties that Rebecca was systematically dismantling. She's sold off 3 of the smaller developments already, I told Ethan as he slid into the seat across from me. Properties that Dad specifically acquired for their long-term potential. Ethan frowned, scanning the paperwork. She's liquidating assets fast. The question is, where's the money going? These sales don't show up as capital investments anywhere in the company's quarterly filings. That's what I need to find out, I said, pulling out my grandmother's unopened letter from my bag. I'd been carrying it everywhere, waiting for the right moment. And I think this might help. Ethan eyed the envelope. What's that? A letter from my grandmother Eleanor. She died 3 months before Dad, but arranged for this to be delivered to me after I returned from Cambodia. And you haven't opened it yet? Ethan looked incredulous. I ran my finger along the sealed edge. I've been waiting. Grandma Eleanor was the only person who saw through Rebecca completely. She and Dad were incredibly close. She helped him start Collins Properties. If anyone knew his true intentions. The bell above the coffee shop door jingled, and Natalie walked in, shaking rain from her umbrella. She spotted us and made her way over. "Good news," she said, sliding into the third chair at our table. "I've been reviewing your father's previous will drafts. There's something interesting in the language about the Westlake Community Gardens project." I straightened up. "What about it?" "He specified it as a separate entity from Collins Properties, with you named as the project director." She pulled out a document and placed it on the table. "This draft is from 8 months before he died." "But the final will didn't mention that specifically," I said, scanning the document. "Exactly. The final will was much more general, leaving everything to be divided equally between you and Rebecca. But there's no specific mention of the Gardens project at all. It's as if someone deliberately removed that section." Ethan's eyes widened. "You think the will was altered?" "I'm saying it's suspicious," Natalie replied cautiously, "especially given what we know about Rebecca's sudden announcement of the luxury condo development on that exact property." My hands trembled slightly as I picked up my grandmother's letter. "I think it's time I read this." Natalie and Ethan exchanged glances as I carefully opened the envelope and unfolded the pages inside. My grandmother's elegant handwriting filled 3 pages, dated just 2 weeks before her death. "My dearest Maya," I read aloud, my voice barely above a whisper. "If you're reading this, I'm gone, and I fear Thomas may be gone too. There are things you need to know, things I've observed that trouble me deeply." I paused, taking a deep breath before continuing. "Your father has been unwell for some time, though he's hidden it from everyone but me. Rebecca has been taking advantage of his weakness, slowly positioning herself to take control. I've seen documents on his desk that concern me, changes to his will, transfers of property, things that don't align with the plans he's shared with me over the years." Natalie leaned forward, her legal mind clearly engaged. "Most concerning is what I overheard last week," I continued reading. "Rebecca and Jason discussing how they would revitalize the Westlake property once they got it away from Thomas's pet project. Your father bought that land with a specific vision, affordable housing with community gardens that would benefit the whole neighborhood. He wanted you to oversee it, Maya. He told me how impressed he was with your community development work overseas. But I fear Rebecca is working to erase that plan entirely. I've made copies of the original documents your father signed regarding Westlake. They're with my personal effects in the cedar chest in my bedroom, the one with the butterflies carved into the lid. Thomas gave me the only key, which I've enclosed with this letter. Trust your instincts, Maya. You are so much stronger than you know. Your father saw it too. Don't let Rebecca's manipulations stand. Fight for what's right, for Thomas's true legacy." The letter ended with a simple, "All my love, Grandma Eleanor." I looked up at Natalie and Ethan, who sat in stunned silence. "The cedar chest," I finally said. "It should still be at Pine Crest Manor, in Grandma's old room." "We need those documents," Natalie said firmly. "If your grandmother made copies of your father's original intentions for Westlake, that could be crucial evidence." "But how do I get in?" I asked. "Rebecca's made it clear I'm not welcome at Pinecrest anymore." Ethan smiled slowly. "You said your mother texted about a charity gala, right? Sounds like the perfect opportunity to visit your grandmother's room while everyone's distracted." I nodded, a plan already forming in my mind. "The gala's next. Saturday. Rebecca always invites her entire social circle. There could be 100 people or more." "Perfect cover," Natalie agreed. "And I should come with you." "As what?" I asked. "Rebecca knows you're an estate attorney." "As my +1, Ethan suggested. I still get invited to these events as a financial advisor. No one will question if I bring a date. I felt a twinge of something unexpected at the thought of Ethan and Natalie attending together, but pushed it aside. This wasn't about personal feelings. It was about justice. "There's one more thing we need," I said, pulling out my phone and dialing a number. Someone on the inside. The call connected after 2 rings. "Hello? Zoe? It's Maya Collins. I think it's time we had that talk you mentioned." Zoe Miller had been Rebecca's assistant for 3 years. She'd reached out to me a month ago with concerns about some of Rebecca's business practices, but had been too afraid to say more. Now I needed her help. As Ethan and Natalie listened, I arranged to meet Zoe that evening at a small restaurant far from any of Rebecca's usual haunts. When I hung up, Natalie raised an eyebrow. "Rebecca's assistant? Can we trust her?" "We're about to find out," I replied, gathering my papers. But Zoe was hired by my father originally. She's been uncomfortable with Rebecca's leadership for months. If anyone knows where the bodies are buried, it's her. That evening, as I walked into the dimly lit restaurant, I spotted Zoe immediately, hunched in a corner booth, nervously scanning the room. She relaxed slightly when she saw me. "Thank you for meeting me," I said, sliding into the seat across from her. Zoe glanced around once more before leaning forward. "I could lose my job for this. I know, and I appreciate the risk you're taking. But I think you contacted me because you know something's wrong." She nodded slowly. "It started small. Rebecca rerouting funds from one project to another without proper documentation. I thought it was just expedience. But then what?" I prompted gently. "The Westlake property. Your father was so excited about that project. He had architectural plans drawn up for affordable housing units built around community gardens. He talked about it constantly in his last months." She pulled out her phone, swiping through to find something. "I kept a copy of this." She showed me a photo of my father, smiling broadly, standing in front of the Westlake property with a set of architectural plans in his hands. The plans clearly showed garden spaces integrated with modest housing units. "Rebecca announced the luxury condo development the week after his funeral," Zoe continued. "She told the board your father had changed his mind about the Westlake project before he died, but I never saw any evidence of that. And then—" She hesitated, lowering her voice even further. "And then?" I urged. "I found her shredding documents from your father's private files. When I asked about it, she said she was cleaning up outdated paperwork. But one of the pages that fell out had your name on it, with the word Westlake underlined." My heart raced. This confirmed everything in my grandmother's letter. "There's more," Zoe said, her voice barely audible now. "The charity gala next weekend? It's supposed to be raising funds for the development's green initiatives. But I've seen the budgets. There are no green initiatives in the plans. The money's being diverted to a separate account that Jason controls." "Do you have proof of this?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Zoe nodded, pulling a small USB drive from her purse. "Everything I could copy without being noticed. Account numbers, altered documents, emails. It's all here." As I reached for the drive, she grabbed my wrist. "Be careful, Maya. Rebecca's desperate. The company's in trouble. She's leveraged everything on these new luxury developments. And the market's not responding the way she promised the board it would. If this all collapses, it will destroy Colin's properties," I finished for her. "And she'll blame you," Zoe warned. "She's already telling people you're trying to sabotage the company out of spite." I slipped the USB drive into my pocket. "Thank you, Zoe. I won't forget this." As I left the restaurant, I called Natalie. "We need to move faster," I said without preamble. "Rebecca's put the entire company at risk, and she's using the charity gala to raise funds under false pretenses. That's fraud, Natalie replied sharply. We need to get those documents from your grandmother's chest before Rebecca realizes what we're doing. I looked up at the night sky, stars obscured by Chicago's lights. The gala's in 5 days. We'll be ready. I didn't add what I was really thinking, that in 5 days, Rebecca would finally discover what it felt like to lose everything, just as she'd done to me. But unlike her, I would be taking back what was rightfully mine, not stealing what belonged to someone else. And maybe, just maybe, I would be saving our father's true legacy in the process. The night of the charity gala arrived with a storm that seemed fitting for what I was about to do. Pinecrest Manor glowed with golden light. Dozens of luxury cars lined the circular driveway, and servers in crisp uniforms circulated with champagne flutes among Chicago's elite. I sat in my rental car down the street, watching the arriving guests through sheets of rain. My phone buzzed with a text from Ethan. In position by the east entrance, Natalie's already inside. Security's focused on the main hall. I took a deep breath, checked my appearance one last time in the rearview mirror, and stepped out into the rain. The black cocktail dress I'd chosen was elegant but understated, meant to help me blend in rather than stand out. My goal wasn't to make a scene, at least not yet. I slipped in through a side entrance, nodding confidently to a security guard who barely glanced my way. The mansion was filled with familiar faces, board members, business associates, family friends, all gathered to support Rebecca's vision for the Westlake property. Large displays around the ballroom showed renderings of sleek glass and steel luxury condominiums with token patches of greenery. Nothing like the community-centered development my father had planned. Maya? A surprised voice made me turn around. Mom stood there, looking elegant but frail in a navy blue dress. You came. I hugged her, genuinely happy to see her despite everything. Of course I came, Mom. Rebecca didn't tell me you'd accepted the invitation. Her eyes searched my face. Are you two? Have you patched things up? Not exactly, I admitted. But I wanted to see what she's doing with Dad's projects. Mom's gaze drifted to the displays. It's impressive, isn't it? The Westlake development will be the most exclusive address in the area. Is that what Dad wanted for that property? I asked carefully. Before Mom could answer, Rebecca's voice rang out from across the room. Everyone, I'd like to welcome you to the Collins Legacy Gala. All heads turned toward the grand staircase where Rebecca stood, resplendent in a designer gown, Jason at her side. She raised her champagne glass. As many of you know, Collins Properties has entered an exciting new chapter. Tonight, we celebrate not just our upcoming Westlake luxury residences, but the charitable foundation we're establishing alongside it. 10% of all proceeds from tonight will go toward creating green spaces throughout our developments. Applause filled the room. I noticed Natalie on the far side, standing with Ethan, both of them watching Rebecca with carefully neutral expressions. Now, Rebecca continued, please enjoy the evening. The silent auction for naming rights to various aspects of the development is open in the East Wing. And remember, your generosity tonight helps ensure a greener tomorrow. As the crowd dispersed, I made my way toward the grand staircase. Rebecca's smile faltered when she spotted me. Maya, she said, quickly recovering. What a surprise. I wouldn't miss it, I replied with a smile that matched her insincerity. Dad would have loved seeing his Westlake property finally developed. Her eyes narrowed slightly. Yes, well, plans evolve. Business decisions must be practical, not just idealistic. Is that what happened to Dad's community garden concept? It evolved into luxury condos? Jason stepped forward, placing his arm around Rebecca's waist. Maya, always good to see you. Perhaps this isn't the place for business discussions. On the contrary, I countered, I think a charity gala specifically about the Westlake development is exactly the place. I'm curious about the finances, actually. The promotional materials mention a $10 million investment, but according to the public filings, Collins Properties has already leveraged nearly twice that amount against the property. Rebecca's smile vanished entirely. You've been looking into company records? Public records? I corrected. Fascinating reading. A server passed with a tray of champagne. I took a glass, using the moment to glance around the room. Mom was engaged in conversation with old family friends. Ethan had positioned himself near the East Wing entrance, the path to the family quarters where Grandma Eleanor's room was located. Natalie was chatting with board members, likely gathering more information. "If you'll excuse us," Rebecca said. Coldly, "We have guests to attend to." "Of course," I replied. "Oh, and Rebecca? The roses in the garden are dying. Dad would be heartbroken." It was a small jab, but I saw it land as her face flushed with anger. She and Jason moved away quickly, her whispering furiously in his ear. I sipped my champagne and began circulating through the crowd, reconnecting with family friends and business associates who seemed surprised but pleased to see me. Many asked about my time in Cambodia, showing genuine interest rather than the dismissive attitude Rebecca had cultivated. "You know, your father spoke of your work overseas with such pride," Mrs. Henderson, an old family friend, told me. "He always said you had his compassion, while Rebecca had his business sense. He thought, you two would make a perfect team someday." I smiled sadly. That was his dream. "Such a shame about the Westlake project changing," she continued, lowering her voice. "Thomas was so excited about creating something sustainable that would benefit the whole community." "You knew about his original plans?" I asked, surprised. "Oh yes, dear. He showed me the designs himself. Said it was going to be his legacy project, affordable homes with gardens that would bring people together. Very different from these luxury units Rebecca's building." My phone buzzed with a text from Ethan. "Coast clear, East Wing empty. Now's your chance." I excused myself from Mrs. Henderson and made my way casually toward the East Wing. As I neared the entrance, I caught sight of Rebecca deep in conversation with two board members, her back to me. Perfect timing. The family quarters of Pinecrest Manor were eerily quiet compared to the noise of the gala. I moved quickly down the familiar hallway, past my old bedroom, past Dad's study, to the room that had been my grandmother's. The door was unlocked. Rebecca had converted it to a guest room, stripping away most of Grandma Eleanor's personal touches. But the large cedar chest with butterfly carvings remained at the foot of the bed. My hands trembled slightly as I inserted the small key from Grandma's letter. The lock turned with a soft click, and I lifted the heavy lid. Inside were neatly organized files, decades of my grandmother's meticulous record-keeping. I quickly located a folder labeled Thomas Westlake Project and began photographing every document inside with my phone. What I found exceeded my expectations. Not only were there original architectural plans and my father's handwritten notes about his vision for the property, but there were also signed documents officially naming me as project director. Most crucially, there was a codicil to his will, properly witnessed and notarized, specifying that the Westlake property was to be developed according to his community garden housing plan, under my supervision, regardless of who controlled the main company. My heart pounded as I photographed the last document. This was exactly what we needed. Proof that Rebecca had deliberately gone against our father's legally expressed wishes. I sent the photos to Natalie and Ethan, then carefully replaced everything and locked the chest. As I turned to leave, I nearly collided with Zoe, who stood in the doorway. "Maya," she whispered urgently. "Rebecca's looking for you. She's suspicious." "Did you find anything else?" I asked, following her quickly back toward the hallway. "Better," she said, pulling a small notebook from her clutch. "Jason's access codes to the offshore accounts where they're moving the charity funds. He left his phone unlocked while dancing, and I memorized what I could." I took the notebook, amazed at her resourcefulness. "Zoe, This is going somewhere, little sister? Rebecca stood at the end of the hallway, arms crossed, eyes blazing with fury. Just visiting Grandma's room, I said casually, for old time's sake. In the middle of a gala? How sentimental. Her gaze shifted to Zoe. And my assistant is giving you a private tour? How thoughtful of her. Zoe straightened, her spine. Ms. Collins, I was just escorting your sister back to the main event. You're fired, Zoe, Rebecca said coldly. Clear out your desk tomorrow. Rebecca, I started, but she cut me off. Save it, Maya. I know what you're doing. Showing up here asking questions about finances, snooping around. Did you really think I wouldn't notice? Did you think I'd just let you waltz back in and take what's mine? What's yours? I repeated, anger rising. You mean what you stole? Dad's company, his legacy, his vision for Westlake? I built Collins Properties into what it is today. She hissed, stepping closer. While you were off playing humanitarian in the jungle, I was here, making the hard decisions, growing our portfolio. And leveraging the company into debt, I countered. Misusing charity funds, ignoring Dad's explicit wishes for the Westlake property. Her eyes widened slightly. You know nothing about business, Maya. Sometimes decisions have to be made that sentimentalists like you and Dad wouldn't understand. Is that what you tell yourself to justify fraud? The word hung in the air between us. Rebecca's face paled, then flushed with rage. Get out, she whispered. Get out of my house before I have security throw you out. Your house? I said quietly. This is still our family home, Rebecca. And Collins Properties is still our family company. Dad wanted us to share it, to build his legacy together. Well, he's not here anymore, is he? She snapped. And I'm in control now. So unless you want to create a very public scene, I suggest you leave quietly. I glanced at Zoe, who looked terrified but determined. We'll go, I said. But this isn't over, Rebecca. Yes, it is, she replied with absolute certainty. You have no idea what you're up against. As Zoe and I walked back toward the main hall, I texted Ethan and Natalie to meet us at the car. We slipped out a side door, unnoticed by the guests, still enjoying Rebecca's elaborate deception. In the car, rain pounding on the roof, I showed them what I'd found in Grandma Eleanor's chest. Natalie's eyes widened as she swiped through the photos. This codicil is legitimate. The witnessing, the notarization, it's all proper. And it specifically states the Westlake property must be developed according to Thomas's original plans. And this, Zoe added, showing her notebook with the account numbers, proves they're diverting the charity funds to offshore accounts. Ethan whistled low. We've got her. The question is, what do we do now? We move fast, I decided. Rebecca knows we're onto her. She'll try to cover her tracks. The company board needs to see this, Ethan said, and the authorities need to know about the charity fraud. I'll start the legal process first thing tomorrow, Natalie agreed. With this evidence, we can file for an injunction to stop the Westlake development immediately. I stared out at Pinecrest Manor, still glowing with light as Chicago's elite celebrated inside, oblivious to the deception funding their champagne. She thinks she's won, I said quietly. She has no idea what's coming. The next morning, I woke to frantic banging on my apartment door. I opened it to find Zoe, breathless and panicked. She's destroying everything, she gasped. Rebecca came into the office at dawn and started shredding documents, deleting files. She knows we have something on her. I quickly made coffee while Zoe called Natalie and Ethan. Within an hour, all four of us were gathered in my living room, planning our next move. We need to act today, Natalie insisted. I can file for an emergency injunction based on the codicil and the evidence of fund misappropriation. And I can call an emergency board meeting, Ethan added. I still have contacts who will listen. What about me? Zoe asked. I'm officially unemployed as of this morning. You're our inside knowledge, I told her. Everything about how Rebecca operates, how she's structured these deals. We need that information. By noon, Natalie had filed the legal paperwork, and Ethan had convinced 3 key board members to call an emergency meeting for the following morning. I prepared a comprehensive presentation detailing everything we'd discovered, including my father's original vision for the Westlake property. That evening, my phone rang with a call from an unknown number. I answered cautiously. "Maya, it's Jason." Rebecca's husband was the last person I expected to hear from. "Jason? Why are you calling me?" He sounded stressed, his voice lower than usual. "Rebecca doesn't know I'm calling. I wanted to warn you." "Warn me about what?" "She's planning something desperate. The banks are calling in loans. Investors are getting nervous about the Westlake project. And now with this emergency board meeting tomorrow." He paused. "She mentioned making sure you couldn't attend. I don't know exactly what she means, but be careful." "Why are you telling me this?" I asked, suspicious of his sudden concern. "Because this has gone too far," he said simply. "The charity funds, the forged documents. I went along with it because she convinced me it was just creative accounting. But now I'm looking at serious legal consequences too." "You could testify," I suggested. "Help us set things right." "I'm not there yet," he admitted. "But I couldn't let her do whatever she's planning without warning you." After he hung up, I immediately called Natalie. "Rebecca's getting desperate. We need to be careful." "Stay at my place tonight," she offered. "It's secure, and she doesn't know where I live." I agreed, quickly packing an overnight bag and taking a circuitous route to Natalie's apartment. We spent the evening finalizing our presentation for the board, going over every detail until we were confident our case was airtight. "What do you think will happen?" I asked Natalie as we finally took a break, sharing a late dinner of takeout, Thai food. She considered the question carefully. "Best case scenario? The board votes to remove Rebecca as CEO, the authorities freeze the diverted funds, and the courts uphold your father's codicil for the Westlake property. And worst case? Corporate litigation can drag on for years," she admitted. "Rebecca could tie everything up in court, drain resources fighting the charges. But we'd still be right," I insisted. Natalie smiled, her first genuine smile all day. "Yes, we'd still be right. And sometimes, that's enough to keep fighting." The next morning dawned clear and cold. Natalie and I arrived at the Collins property's headquarters an hour early, meeting Ethan and Zoe in the lobby. Security had been instructed to let us up to the boardroom, thanks to Ethan's influence with the board members calling the meeting. "Ready?" Ethan asked as we rode the elevator to the top floor. I nodded, clutching my portfolio containing copies of all our evidence. As ready as I'll ever be. The boardroom was imposing, a long table of polished mahogany overlooking the Chicago skyline. Portraits of past company leaders hung on the walls, including my father's. I felt his presence strongly as board members began filing in, looking curious and concerned. At exactly 9 a.m., Rebecca burst through the doors, followed by her corporate attorney. She stopped short when she saw me. "What is she doing here?" she demanded of the board chairman. "Ms. Collins was invited by several board members," he replied calmly. "This meeting concerns matters relevant to both Collins sisters." Rebecca took her seat at the head of the table, glaring at me. "Let's get this over with." The chairman cleared his throat. "This emergency meeting has been called to address serious concerns about the direction of Collins properties, specifically regarding the Westlake development and certain financial irregularities." Rebecca scoffed. "Based on what? My sisters' jealous conspiracy theories?" "Based on this," I said, standing and distributing folders to each board member. "Evidence that Collins Properties under Rebecca's leadership has deliberately violated the terms of Thomas Collins' will, particularly regarding the Westlake property. For the next 30 minutes, I methodically presented our findings, the codicil specifying my role in the Westlake development, the financial documents showing Rebecca's mismanagement, the evidence of charity funds being diverted to offshore accounts. The boardroom grew increasingly tense as I spoke. Several members began whispering among themselves, looking alarmed. Rebecca's face cycled through anger, disbelief, and finally, fear. When I finished, the chairman looked grave. "These are extremely serious allegations, Ms. Collins. Rebecca, how do you respond?" Rebecca stood, her composure visibly cracking. "This is absurd. My sister has fabricated evidence because she's bitter about being excluded from the company. That codicil was never properly executed." "It bears the signature of 2 witnesses and a notary," Natalie interrupted. "We've verified its authenticity." "And these financial records," added a board member, holding up the documents on the diverted charity funds. "These appear to show clear misappropriation." "I've grown this company," Rebecca shouted, her control finally snapping. "I've made the hard decisions while Maya was off playing savior in Cambodia. The Westlake luxury development will be worth 3 times what my father's ridiculous garden housing would have been." "So, you admit you deliberately went against your father's expressed wishes for the property?" the chairman asked quietly. Rebecca realized her mistake too late. She looked around the room, seeing the shocked and disappointed faces of the board members. "I think," said the chairman slowly, "we need to call for an immediate vote of no confidence in the current leadership and a freeze on all Collins Properties projects pending a full audit." "You can't do that," Rebecca's attorney interjected. "Ms. Collins has full operational control." "Not if she's been acting against the company's interests and the explicit terms of Thomas Collins' will," countered another board member. The vote was swift and decisive. 11-1 in favor of removing Rebecca as CEO and installing an interim leadership committee until the legal matters could be resolved. The board also voted unanimously to halt the Westlake luxury development immediately. As the meeting adjourned, Rebecca sat motionless, staring at the table. I approached her carefully. "Rebecca," I said quietly, "this didn't have to happen this way." She looked up, her eyes cold with hatred. "You've destroyed everything. No, you did that when you decided to steal Dad's legacy and twist it into something he never wanted." As I turned to leave, she called after me. "This isn't over, Maya. I still have resources you don't know about." "Maybe," I acknowledged. "But now everyone knows the truth, and that's what matters most." Outside, the boardroom, Natalie, Ethan, and Zoe waited anxiously. "Well?" Ethan asked. "Rebecca's out," I said simply. "The board voted for interim leadership pending a full investigation." Zoe looked relieved. "And the Westlake project?" "Halted for now, until we can implement Dad's original vision." Natalie squeezed my hand. "This is just the beginning, Maya. There will be legal battles ahead." "I know," I replied. "But for the first time since Dad died, I feel like we're on the right path." As we left the Collins Properties building, my phone rang. It was Mom. "Maya?" Her voice sounded small and confused. "What's happening?" "Rebecca just called me, crying. Something about the board removing her?" "Mom," I said gently, "there's a lot I need to explain to you. Can we meet for lunch?" "Yes," she replied after a pause. "I think it's time I heard the whole story." The weeks following the board meeting were a whirlwind of legal proceedings, financial audits, and media coverage. Rebecca didn't go quietly. She filed countersuit after countersuit, claiming I had manipulated the board with false information. But each new financial audit only revealed more mismanagement and questionable decisions under her leadership. I split my time between working with the interim leadership committee and meeting with the architects who had designed my father's original vision for the Westlake property. The community garden housing concept was still viable. Even more so, In the current market where sustainable living was increasingly valued, one rainy afternoon, I sat in Dad's old office at Collins Properties, now temporarily mine, reviewing the latest financial reports with Ethan. The door opened, and Mom walked in hesitantly. "Am I interrupting?" she asked. "Not at all," I said, surprised but pleased to see her. Mom had been keeping her distance since learning the full extent of Rebecca's deception. The revelation that her eldest daughter had deliberately gone against Thomas's wishes and misappropriated funds had shaken her deeply. "I went to see her today," Mom said, sitting down across from me. "Rebecca, I mean. At her condo." Ethan discreetly excused himself, leaving us alone. "How is she?" I asked, genuinely curious. I hadn't spoken to Rebecca since the board meeting. "Not good," Mom admitted. "Jason's left her. Apparently, he's cooperating with the investigators to reduce his own liability, and the bank is foreclosing on their condo because of some personal loans they can't repay." I felt a complicated mix of emotions, satisfaction that justice was being served, but also a tinge of sympathy for my sister's total downfall. "She's still angry," Mom continued. "Still blaming you for everything. But I told her." She paused, taking a deep breath. "I told her that it was time to accept responsibility for her own actions." "You did?" I couldn't hide my surprise. Mom had always favored Rebecca, always made excuses for her behavior. "Your grandmother's letter opened my eyes," Mom said quietly. "And then finding out about the charity funds." She shook her head. "That wasn't how Thomas and I raised her." I reached across the desk and took her hand. "I never wanted it to come to this, Mom. I just wanted what Dad intended, for us to share the legacy, to build something meaningful together." "I know that now," she said, squeezing my hand. "I should have seen it sooner. I was just so lost after your father died. Rebecca seemed so confident, so sure of everything." "She's always been good at appearing confident," I acknowledged. Mom nodded, then straightened her shoulders. "I came to tell you that I've decided to testify in the case against her, if needed. About the pressure she put on me after the funeral. About how she misrepresented your father's wishes to me." The significance of this offer wasn't lost on me. For Mom to testify against her own daughter showed how deeply Rebecca's betrayal had affected her. "Are you sure?" I asked gently. "It's the right thing to do," she said firmly. "For Thomas's legacy. For the truth." After Mom left, I called Natalie to update her on this unexpected development. She was in the middle of depositions with former Collins Properties employees who were coming forward with more evidence of Rebecca's misconduct. "Your mother's testimony would be significant," Natalie confirmed. "It would establish a pattern of deception from the very beginning." "It just feels so—" I searched for the right word. "Final?" Natalie suggested. "Yes. Like the last nail in the coffin of any relationship with my sister." "Maya," Natalie said gently, "that relationship was damaged by Rebecca's actions, not yours. You're just bringing the truth to light." Later that evening, as I was leaving the office, I received a text from an unknown number. "Parking garage, level 3. Now. Important information about Rebecca." I hesitated, suspicious of the anonymous message. But my curiosity won out. I took the elevator down to the parking garage, making sure Natalie knew where I was going, just in case. Level 3 was dimly lit and nearly empty. I walked cautiously between the rows of parked cars, alert for any movement. A figure stepped out from behind a concrete pillar, and I tensed, ready to run, until I recognized Jason, Rebecca's husband. "Thanks for coming," he said, looking nervously over his shoulder. "What's this about, Jason?" He ran a hand through his disheveled hair. "Rebecca's desperate. She's liquidating everything she can, moving money around. I think she's planning to flee the country." "What?" I was stunned. "But all her accounts are being monitored." "Not all of them," he said grimly. There's one more offshore account I didn't know about until yesterday. She's been moving small amounts into it for years, building a nest egg, over $2 million. My mind raced. We need to alert the authorities. There's more, Jason continued. She's not just running away. She wants revenge first. I heard her on the phone, making arrangements to have someone take care of the Westlake property. What does that mean? I think she's going to try to destroy it, he said. Make sure that if she can't have it, no one can, especially not you. Why are you telling me this? I asked, still suspicious of his motives. Jason looked away. Because I was wrong. I got caught up in Rebecca's world, the status, the money, the power. I convinced myself we were just being smart business people. But your father was good to me, Maya. He gave me my start. And what Rebecca's planning now? It's criminal. When? I demanded. When is she planning this? Tonight? He said. That's all I know. I immediately called Natalie, who contacted the authorities. Within an hour, police were dispatched to secure the Westlake property and search for Rebecca. But she was nowhere to be found. For 3 tense days, we waited. The police monitored the property, and financial authorities worked to locate and freeze Rebecca's hidden offshore account. Jason provided what information he could, but it was clear he'd been kept in the dark about many of Rebecca's dealings. On the 4th day, I received a call from the police. Rebecca had been apprehended trying to board a private flight to the Cayman Islands with fake identification and nearly $100,000 in cash. In her possession were also documents detailing plans to have the Westlake property contaminated with industrial chemicals that would have rendered it unusable for years. A final act of vengeance against me and our father's legacy. The newspaper headlines were brutal. Collins heiress arrested in flight attempt. Property mogul planned environmental sabotage. The story of Rebecca's fall from grace became a cautionary tale in Chicago's business circles. The criminal case moved swiftly, bolstered by the mountain of evidence against her. Rebecca, once the darling of Chicago's business community, now faced multiple felony charges: fraud, embezzlement, conspiracy, attempted environmental crimes. The prosecutor offered a plea deal to limit her prison time, but Rebecca, still defiant, refused. The day of the preliminary hearing arrived, gray and cold. The courthouse steps were crowded with reporters as I made my way inside with Natalie, Ethan, Mom, and Zoe, all called as witnesses. The courtroom fell silent as Rebecca was led in, wearing a prison jumpsuit instead of her usual designer clothes. She looked smaller somehow, diminished. Her eyes met mine briefly before darting away. The judge called the court to order and the prosecutor began outlining the case against Rebecca, a methodical account of her systematic dismantling of our father's legacy for personal gain. When it was my turn to testify, I approached the witness stand with a heavy heart. As I swore to tell the truth, I looked directly at Rebecca, searching for any sign of the sister I'd once known, the little girl who had taught me to ride a bike, who had defended me against bullies in elementary school, before ambition and jealousy had twisted her. Ms. Collins, the prosecutor began, please describe the events following your father's death. For the next hour, I detailed everything: the manipulation at the funeral, the forged documents, the discovery of the codicil in Grandma Eleanor's chest, the misappropriated charity funds, and finally, the planned sabotage of the Westlake property. Throughout my testimony, Rebecca sat motionless, her face a mask of indifference. But when I mentioned our father's original vision for Westlake, the community gardens, the affordable housing, the gathering spaces for neighbors, I saw her facade crack slightly. Something like regret flickered across her features before the mask slipped back into place. When it was Rebecca's turn to speak, she surprised everyone by changing her plea to guilty on all charges. I have nothing to say in my defense, she told the judge, her voice hollow. Everything my sister testified to is true. The judge accepted her plea and scheduled sentencing for the following month. As Rebecca was led away, she paused near me. "You won," she said quietly. "Congratulations." "This isn't about winning, Rebecca," I replied. "It's about doing what's right." She gave a bitter laugh. "Always so noble, Maya. Always Dad's true daughter." As she disappeared through the courtroom doors, Mom slipped her hand into mine. "It's over," she whispered, but it wasn't quite over. There was still the matter of rebuilding what Rebecca had nearly destroyed. Collins Properties' reputation, the Westlake project, and most importantly, our family's legacy. 6 months later, I stood on the construction site of what would soon be the Thomas Collins Community Gardens housing development. The spring sun warmed my face as I watched workers installing solar panels on the roof of the first completed unit. Around me, raised garden beds were being prepared for planting, and a playground was taking shape at the center of the property. "It's really happening," Ethan said, joining me with coffee cups in hand. "Your dad would be proud." I accepted the coffee gratefully. It's still hard to believe sometimes. A year ago, I was in Cambodia, thinking I'd never have a role in Collins Properties. "And now you're CEO," he grinned. "By unanimous board vote, no less." The transformation of Collins Properties had been as challenging as it was rewarding. After Rebecca's sentencing, 8 years in prison with the possibility of parole after 5, the company had faced a crisis of confidence. Investors were nervous, projects were stalled, and the media coverage had been relentless. But slowly, methodically, we'd rebuilt trust. The interim leadership committee had done excellent work stabilizing the company's finances, and my appointment as permanent CEO had signaled a return to Thomas Collins' original values of ethical development and community investment. "Ms. Collins?" A young woman approached with a tablet. "The community center design team is ready for your input on the final plans." "Thanks, Mia. I'll be right there." The community center would be the heart of the development, a place for classes, meetings, and events that would bring residents together. We'd named it after Grandma Eleanor, whose letter had changed everything. As the young woman walked away, Natalie arrived, looking professional in a tailored suit. She'd recently opened her own legal practice specializing in ethical corporate governance, with Collins Properties as her first major client. "Sorry I'm late," she said, giving me a quick kiss. Our relationship had blossomed amid the chaos of the past months, unexpected, but welcome. "The meeting with the neighborhood association ran long. Good news?" I asked. "They're fully on board with the expansion into the adjacent property," she confirmed. "They love that we're prioritizing green spaces and affordable units." The adjacent property had been a surprise acquisition. One of Rebecca's luxury condo projects that had fallen through when her financial house of cards collapsed. We'd purchased it at auction and incorporated it into the community gardens concept, expanding the original vision. Zoe joined us, clipboard in hand. As my new executive assistant, she'd been instrumental in reorganizing the company's operations. The school district representatives just arrived for the tour. They're excited about the potential partnership for the educational garden program. We made our way toward the site office, passing construction workers and landscapers bringing the development to life. Mom was there talking with the head gardener about heritage vegetable varieties that would thrive in the community plots. After Rebecca's arrest, Mom had thrown herself into the Westlake project, finding purpose in helping to realize Dad's vision. She'd moved out of Pinecrest Manor, too many painful memories, and into a comfortable condo nearby that I'd helped her purchase. "Maya," she called, waving me over. "Charles has the most wonderful idea for teaching children about sustainable agriculture using these raised beds." I smiled, seeing the animation in her face that had been missing since Dad's death. "That sounds perfect for the school program we're developing." The site visit with the school district representatives went well, as did the review of the community center plans. By late afternoon, I found myself alone at the highest point of the property, Looking out over what would soon be a thriving community, my phone buzzed with a text from Diane, Rebecca's court-appointed therapist. "She read your letter. Wants to meet next month if you're willing." I stared at the message, conflicted. The letter I'd sent Rebecca in prison had been difficult to write, not offering forgiveness exactly, but opening the door to understanding. I'd shared news of the Westlake project, enclosed photos of the progress, explained how we were bringing Dad's vision to life. "Everything okay?" Natalie asked, joining me at the overlook. "Rebecca wants to meet," I said, showing her the text. Natalie didn't immediately respond, giving me space to process. Finally, she asked, "What do you want to do?" I gazed out at the construction site, watching as workers installed a sign at the I gazed out at the construction site, watching as workers installed a sign at the entrance. Thomas Collins Community Gardens, building together. After a long moment, I texted back, "I'll be there." Whatever came of meeting Rebecca, I knew one thing for certain. Dad's true legacy wasn't just buildings or property or even gardens. It was the values he'd lived by, the vision he'd had for bringing people together, for creating something meaningful that would outlast him. And that legacy lived on, not through inheritance or property deeds, but through choices made each day to honor what mattered most. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across what would soon be garden plots filled with life, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. The path forward wouldn't be easy, rebuilding a company, healing a family, perhaps even eventually finding common ground with Rebecca. But for the first time since that snowy day at Dad's funeral, I was certain I was exactly where I needed to be. Natalie slipped her hand into mine. "Ready to go? The team's waiting to celebrate breaking ground on the community center." I took one last look at the site transformation underway. "Yes," I said, turning toward the future with confidence. "I'm ready." 3 days after my visit to the construction site, I walked into Collins Properties' downtown headquarters with a fresh perspective and renewed sense of purpose. The offices buzzed with energy as employees greeted me with genuine smiles, a stark contrast to the tension that had permeated the company under Rebecca's leadership. In less than a year, we'd managed to shift the corporate culture from cutthroat competition to collaborative progress. "Good morning, Ms. Collins," called Maria, the receptionist who'd worked for Dad for 15 years and had nearly been fired by Rebecca for questioning financial discrepancies. "The design team left these revised plans for your approval." I accepted the folder with a smile. "Thank you, Maria. And please, it's still just Maya." "The board members are already in the conference room," Zoe informed me, falling into step beside me as I made my way through the office. "And Mr. Fitzgerald from the Environmental Impact Committee called. They've fast-tracked our sustainability certification for the Westlake project." The boardroom, once Rebecca's domain where she'd intimidated and manipulated, was now filled with light and open discussion. Large windows overlooked the city, and Dad's portrait had been reinstalled in its rightful place. "Maya," the board chairman greeted me warmly. "We were just reviewing the quarterly projections. Ethan's financial restructuring plan is already showing results." Ethan, who had accepted my offer to become CFO, pulled up a presentation on the large screen. "We've managed to recoup almost 60% of the funds Rebecca misappropriated. The company's debt-to-asset ratio has improved dramatically, and investor confidence is returning. The Westlake project is generating positive press," added the marketing director. "Applications for the first phase of housing units are already oversubscribed, and 3 other developers have approached us about consulting on similar community-centered projects." I felt a surge of satisfaction. This was exactly what Dad would have wanted. Collins Properties becoming a leader in ethical, sustainable development that benefited communities rather than just generating profits. "There is one issue we need to address," the chairman said, his tone growing serious. "Pinecrest Manor." The room fell silent. The family estate had remained vacant since Mom moved out, its future uncertain amid the legal proceedings. The property taxes alone are substantial, Ethan explained, and maintenance costs continue to accumulate. From a purely financial perspective, selling would be the logical choice. I understood the practical considerations, but the thought of strangers living in my childhood home, in the house my father had loved so deeply, created a hollow feeling in my chest. What about converting it? I suggested, an idea forming. The estate is large enough to be repurposed as a community space, perhaps a retreat center for nonprofits or educational programming. The board members exchanged interested glances. Continuing the Collins legacy of community investment, the chairman nodded thoughtfully. It could work, especially if we structure it as a charitable foundation in Thomas's name. I'd like to explore that option before we consider selling, I said firmly. After the meeting, I drove to Pinecrest Manor for the first time in months. The gates creaked open, revealing an estate that looked diminished somehow. The gardens were overgrown, though Dad's beloved roses still struggled to bloom amid the neglect. I sat on a stone bench near the rose garden, memories washing over me. Summer evenings when Dad would carefully tend each bush, explaining to me the unique characteristics of each variety. "It's all about patience, Maya," he'd say. "You can't rush growth. You nurture, you tend, you give what's needed, and then you have to trust the process." Those words seemed especially relevant now. Collins properties couldn't be restored overnight. Trust, from employees, investors, the community, had to be rebuilt gradually, through consistent actions that demonstrated our renewed commitment to Dad's values. My phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. It was Natalie. "Just checking if we're still on for dinner tonight," she said. "I've got news about Rebecca's case I thought you should hear in person." "Is everything okay?" I asked, suddenly concerned. "Yes, just some developments you should know about. 7 o'clock at Marino's? I'll be there." After ending the call, I wandered through the silent house, footsteps echoing on hardwood floors. In Dad's study, everything remained exactly as he'd left it. Books precisely arranged, his reading, glasses folded on the desk, family photos displayed proudly. I picked up a framed photo of our entire family at my college graduation. Mom and Dad beaming proudly, Rebecca standing slightly apart, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. Had the seeds of her resentment been growing even then? When had my sister decided that having half of everything wasn't enough? A knock at the front door startled me. Opening it, I found Jason standing on the porch, looking uncomfortable. "Sorry to intrude," he said. "I saw your car in the driveway. I've been coming by to check on the place occasionally, making sure the pipes don't freeze, that sort of thing." "That's thoughtful of you," I replied, surprised. "It's the least I could do," he said, hands shoved in his pockets. "Listen, Maya, I know I'm probably the last person you want to see, but there's something I thought you should have." He pulled an envelope from his jacket. "I found this when I was clearing out my things from the condo. It was in a box of Rebecca's personal papers." I accepted the envelope cautiously. My name was written on it in Dad's handwriting. "I don't know what it says," Jason continued, "but it seemed important, and I thought, well, with everything that's happened, thank you," I said simply. After Jason left, I sat on the porch steps and carefully opened the envelope. Inside was a letter dated just weeks before Dad's death. "My dear Maya," it began. "If you're reading this, I'm gone, and things haven't gone as I'd hoped with the company succession. I've been watching Rebecca's behavior with growing concern. Her ambition has always been her strength, but lately, I've seen it becoming something darker, a willingness to compromise our family values for profit and personal gain. I've tried talking to her, but she dismisses my concerns as old-fashioned thinking. That's why I've put specific provisions in my will regarding the Westlake property and your role in its development. It's my hope that this project might bring you two together, combining her business acumen with your compassionate vision. But I fear she may try to circumvent my wishes. Your grandmother Eleanor shares my concerns. We've discussed it at length. Trust her guidance if things become difficult. Know this, Maya. Your time abroad hasn't been wasted, as Rebecca suggests. The experience you've gained, the perspective you've developed, these are precisely the qualities Collins Properties needs for its future. Sometimes standing apart gives us the clearest view of what matters most. I'm proud of you, of your courage, to follow your own path rather than the one others expected. That independence of spirit is your greatest strength. Whatever happens after I'm gone, remember that buildings rise and fall, fortunes come and go, but integrity, doing what's right, even when it's difficult, that's the true measure of success. That's the legacy I hope to leave you both. All my love, Dad. Tears streamed down my face as I read and reread the letter. Dad had known, had seen Rebecca's transformation happening before his eyes. He'd tried to protect his legacy, to protect me, even as his health failed. This letter wasn't just confirmation that I'd been right about Rebecca's manipulation. It was a final message from my father, an affirmation that the path I'd chosen, both before and after his death, was one he understood and valued. I carefully folded the letter and placed it back in the envelope. This was what Rebecca had tried to keep from me. Dad's explicit trust and faith in my vision for the company's future. That evening at Marino's, I showed the letter to Natalie. Over dinner. "This confirms everything," she said after reading it. "Thomas clearly intended for you to have a significant role in the company, especially the Westlake project." "It feels like a final piece falling into place," I agreed. "But it also makes me sad. Dad saw what was happening with Rebecca, tried to prevent it." "You can't blame yourself for not seeing it sooner," Natalie said gently. "Rebecca deliberately isolated you, created a narrative that pushed you to the margins." "What was the news about her case?" I asked, changing the subject. Natalie hesitated. "Her lawyer has approached the prosecutor about a potential plea deal. She's offering to provide information about similar fraudulent practices at other development companies in exchange for a reduced sentence." "She's trying to save herself by throwing former colleagues under the bus," I said, unsurprised. "Essentially, yes. But there's something else." Natalie reached for my hand across the table. "She's specifically requested a meeting with you before agreeing to any deal." "With me? Why?" "She wouldn't say. Her lawyer just indicated it was important to her." I thought about the upcoming visit I'd already agreed to. I was planning to see her next month anyway. "You don't have to," Natalie reminded me. "After everything she's done, you don't owe her anything." "I know," I said, thinking about Dad's letter, about his hope that Rebecca and I might someday find common ground. "But I think I need to, for my own closure, if nothing else." The following week was consumed with preparations for the groundbreaking ceremony for the Eleanor Collins Community Center at Westlake. Mom had thrown herself into planning the event, finding purpose in honoring both Dad and Grandma Eleanor's memory. "The mayor has confirmed he'll attend," she told me excitedly over lunch, "and 3 city council members. The press coverage will be excellent." "You've done an amazing job organizing this, Mom," I said, genuinely impressed by her transformation, from grief-stricken widow to passionate advocate for the community project. She smiled, looking more like herself than she had in months. "It feels good to be useful again. After your father died, and then all the business with Rebecca. I felt so helpless, so foolish for not seeing what was happening." "Rebecca fooled a lot of people," I reminded her. She was very convincing. Mom's expression grew sad. "Have you decided whether you'll visit her?" "I'm going next week," I confirmed. "I'm not sure what to expect." "Will you tell her about the groundbreaking? About how the Westlake project is moving forward as your father intended?" I considered this. Yes, I think so. Whether she cares or not, she should know that Dad's vision is becoming reality, despite her efforts to derail it. The day of the groundbreaking ceremony dawned clear and mild. The Westlake property had been transformed from an empty lot to a bustling construction site, with the community garden beds already installed and the foundations laid for the first housing units. A platform had been erected for the speakers, with rows of chairs for community members and media representatives. Signs displayed architectural renderings of the completed project, modest but attractive homes surrounding communal green spaces, with the community center as its heart. As I approached the podium to give my speech, I felt a momentary flash of stage fright. Public speaking had always been Rebecca's strength, not mine. But as I looked out at the gathered crowd, Mom in the front row, Ethan and Natalie beside her, Zoe managing the event with clipboard in hand, and dozens of community members who would benefit from this development, I found my voice. My father, Thomas Collins, believed that the true purpose of development wasn't just to build structures, but to build community, I began. The Westlake Community Gardens project represents his vision of what thoughtful, sustainable urban development can achieve, bringing people together, creating spaces where families can thrive, where neighbors become friends, where everyone has access to nature and beauty regardless of income. As I spoke, I could almost feel Dad's presence, his pride in seeing his dream taking shape. The ceremonial turning of soil with golden shovels felt symbolic in more ways than one. We weren't just breaking ground on a building project, but cultivating a new direction for Collins Properties itself. After the ceremony, as guests mingled and enjoyed refreshments, Ethan approached with an elderly man I didn't recognize. "Maya, there's someone who wanted to meet you," Ethan said. "This is Harold Winters. He was your father's first business partner." The older man extended his hand. "Thomas spoke of you often, young lady. He would be proud to see what you're doing here." "Thank you," I said, touched by his words. "Did you work with my father on his early projects?" Harold nodded. "Nearly 40 years ago now. We started with nothing but a shared belief that development should serve communities, not exploit them. Your father never lost sight of that, even as the company grew." "Unlike some others in the industry," I said, thinking of Rebecca's luxury-focused approach. "I knew your sister too," Harold said, seeming to read my thoughts. "Bright girl, sharp business mind. But she never quite grasped the heart of what Thomas was building. She saw the success but missed the purpose behind it." "That's a perfect description of Rebecca," I agreed sadly. "Thomas worried about her," Harold continued. "We talked about it the last time I saw him, just weeks before he passed. He said he was counting on you to be the company's conscience, to remind everyone what Collins Properties stands for at its core." Another confirmation that Dad had seen clearly what was happening, had placed his trust in me to preserve what mattered most to him. The knowledge strengthened my resolve to honor that trust, to rebuild the company according to his vision. The prison visiting room was stark and impersonal. Beige walls, uncomfortable plastic chairs bolted to the floor, a vending machine humming in the corner. I sat nervously, waiting for Rebecca to appear, unsure what to expect from this reunion. When she entered, escorted by a guard, I barely recognized her. Gone was the polished executive in designer clothes, replaced by a thin woman in a baggy prison uniform, her once perfect hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. Only her posture remained unchanged, spine straight, chin lifted in defiance. "Maya," she said as she sat across from me. "You actually came." "I said I would," I replied simply. She studied me for a moment. "You look well. Success agrees with you." "I wouldn't call it success," I said. "I'm just trying to rebuild what you nearly destroyed." A flash of the old Rebecca emerged, a tightening around her eyes, a slight curl of her lip. "Still so self-righteous? Some things never change." "I didn't come here to fight, Rebecca. Why did you come? To gloat? To see how far I've fallen?" I shook my head. I came because despite everything, you're still my sister. And because Dad would have wanted me to try. At the mention of our father, something flickered across her face. Pain, regret. I couldn't tell which. "How's Mom?" she asked, changing the subject. "Better. She's helping with the Westlake project, actually. It's given her purpose." "Ah, yes, the famous community gardens. I hear it's become quite the cause célèbre." "We broke ground on the community center last week," I told her. "We're naming it after Grandma Eleanor." Rebecca's gaze dropped to her hands. "Fitting. She always did prefer you." "That's not true," I objected. "She loved us both. She just saw through your manipulations better than most." "Is that what you think this was all about?" Rebecca asked, looking up suddenly. "That I was just being manipulative for the sake of it? What else would you call forging documents, stealing inheritance, diverting charity funds?" "Survival," she said flatly. "Business. Reality." "Reality?" I repeated incredulously. "Rebecca, you committed fraud. You betrayed our father's explicit wishes. You nearly destroyed the company he spent his life building." "I was trying to save it," she snapped, leaning forward. Dad's quaint community-focused approach was becoming unsustainable in today's market. We needed to pivot to luxury developments to stay competitive. "That's simply not true," I countered. "The financials didn't support that conclusion. Dad's approach was profitable and sustainable. It just wasn't generating the massive personal bonuses you wanted." She sat back, a cold smile playing on her lips. "You've become quite the businesswoman, haven't you? A few months as CEO and suddenly you're an expert." "I've learned," I acknowledged. "But unlike you, I've learned that it's possible to be financially successful without compromising our values." Rebecca fell silent, studying me with an unreadable expression. Finally, she asked, "Did you get Dad's letter? The one Jason gave. You?" Surprised, I nodded. "You knew about it?" "I found it after Dad died," she admitted. "Before the funeral. He'd written one to me too." This was unexpected. "What did yours say?" "That he was disappointed in me," Rebecca said, her voice tight with suppressed emotion. "That he saw me losing sight of what mattered. That he hoped you would remind me of the company's true purpose. And instead of heeding his words, you tried to push me out completely." Rebecca's carefully maintained facade cracked slightly. "I was angry. I'd dedicated my entire life to Collins Properties while you were off finding yourself in Cambodia. I was there every day, learning the business, working alongside Dad. And still. He thought you understood his vision better than I did." "It wasn't a competition, Rebecca," I said gently. "Dad valued both of us. He wanted us to work together, to balance each other." "Easy for you to say," she replied bitterly. "You were always his favorite." "That's not true. You were just so determined to prove yourself that you couldn't see how proud he already was of you." Rebecca looked away, blinking rapidly. For a moment, I glimpsed the vulnerability beneath her hard exterior. The little girl who had always strived for perfection, for validation. "Why did you want to see me?" I asked. "Your lawyer said it was important to you before considering any plea deal." She took a deep breath, composing herself. "I wanted to ask about Pinecrest Manor. What's happening with it?" "Nothing yet," I said, surprised by the question. "It's still in legal limbo while the financial aspects of your case are resolved." "Don't sell it," she said abruptly. "What?" "The estate. Don't sell it." There was an urgency in her voice I hadn't expected. It meant everything to Dad. "We're considering converting it into a foundation headquarters," I told her. "A place for educational programs, nonprofit retreats, continuing Dad's legacy of community investment." Something like relief passed across her face. "Good. That's what should happen." "Why do you care?" I asked, genuinely curious. You were ready to risk it as collateral for loans. You nearly lost it to foreclosure. Rebecca stared down at her hands. Because it's the only home we ever had, she said quietly. Because despite everything, those gardens, that house, it's the last physical connection to Dad, to who we were before. For the first time, I saw genuine emotion from my sister. Not calculation, not manipulation, but real feeling. She had lost everything: her freedom, her reputation, her marriage, her position. But somehow, the thought of losing Pinecrest Manor had broken through her carefully constructed walls. "I'm not going to sell it," I promised. "Whatever happens, the estate will stay in the family. We'll continue Dad's legacy in some form." She nodded, unable to speak for a moment. When she finally looked up, her eyes were red-rimmed but dry. "There's something else. That offshore account Jason told you about. The one I was planning to use to flee? What about it?" "The authorities haven't found it yet," she said. "It's hidden too well. The money in it, just over $2 million, it should go to the Westlake project, to building those gardens Dad wanted." I stared at her, speechless. This was the last thing I'd expected from this meeting. "Why would you do that?" I finally managed to ask. "Because it's what Dad would have wanted," she said simply. "And because I was wrong. About everything. The company, the development strategy. You." She swallowed hard. "Especially you." "Rebecca, don't." She held up a hand. "I'm not asking for forgiveness. I don't deserve it, and we both know it. I'm just trying to do one right thing before I spend the next several years in here." She slid a piece of paper across the table. "These are the account details. Do whatever you need to verify it's legitimate. The money is clean. It's mostly from my personal investments over the years, not from the company or the charity funds." I took the paper, still stunned by this unexpected turn. "I don't know what to say." "You don't need to say anything," Rebecca replied, standing up as a guard approached to indicate our time was ending. "Just build those gardens. Make them something Dad would have been proud of." As she turned to leave, I called after her. "I'll come back. Next month, if you want." She paused, not turning around. "I'd like that," she said quietly before being escorted away. I sat there long after she'd gone, trying to process what had just happened. The sister who had stolen my inheritance, who had tried to erase me from our father's legacy, had just offered a meaningful gesture of restitution. It wasn't full redemption. The damage she'd done was too extensive for that. But it was a start. A small acknowledgement of wrong, a tentative step towards something like atonement. On the drive back to Chicago, I called Natalie and told her about the meeting, about Rebecca's surprising offer. "Do you think it's genuine?" Natalie asked cautiously. "Not another manipulation?" "I think it is genuine," I said after considering the question. She seemed different, like her defenses had finally cracked. "Prison can have that effect," Natalie observed. "Forces introspection when there's nowhere else to run." "We'll need to verify the account information, make sure everything is legitimate before accessing any funds," I said. "Of course, I'll contact the authorities tomorrow." "And Natalie? I think I want to visit her regularly. Monthly, maybe." "Are you sure? After everything she did to you?" I thought about Dad's letter, about his hope that Rebecca and I might somehow find a way forward together, about the glimpse of vulnerability I'd seen in my sister today. "I'm sure," I said. "She's still family, and I think Dad would want me to try." 2 months later, I stood in the center of the Thomas Collins Community Gardens, now flourishing with early summer plantings. Children from the neighborhood were helping plant vegetables under the guidance of a master gardener, their laughter filling the air. The first families had moved into the completed housing units, creating a small but growing community centered around the shared green spaces. The formerly hidden account Rebecca had revealed had indeed contained the promised funds, all of which had been channeled into expanding the garden elements of the project, creating additional plots, building a greenhouse for year-round growing, developing educational programs about sustainable urban agriculture. Ethan approached, watching the scene with satisfaction. "Hard to believe how much has changed in a year," he remarked. "From funeral to flourishing," I agreed. "Speaking of which," he said, pulling an envelope from his pocket, "this came for you. Special delivery from the correctional facility." I opened it to find a card from Rebecca. Inside was a brief note. "The gardens look beautiful in the photos you sent. Dad would love seeing his vision realized. Thank you for not giving up on it. Or on me. R." Attached was a sketch she'd made, and surprisingly skilled rendering of the community center with gardens in full bloom around it. At the bottom, she'd written, "For the opening ceremony display, if you think it's appropriate." "Good news?" Ethan asked, noting my expression. "Just my sister," I said, showing him the sketch, "contributing to the project in her own way." Later that day, as I sat with Mom on a bench overlooking the gardens, I felt a sense of completion that had been missing since Dad's death. The company was thriving under its renewed focus on community-centered development. The Westlake project was becoming a model for similar developments in other neighborhoods. Pinecrest Manor was being renovated to serve as both headquarters for the Thomas Collins Foundation and a retreat center for nonprofits working in sustainable community development. And Rebecca, while still serving her sentence, was slowly finding a way to reconcile with her past actions, to reconnect with the values Dad had tried to instill in both of us. "Your father would be so proud," Mom said, watching the children tending their garden plots. "Not just of this place, but of you, of how you fought for his vision, how you've forgiven your sister enough to keep trying with her." "I'm not sure forgiven is the right word yet," I admitted. "But I understand her better now, and I think she's finally beginning to understand herself." Mom squeezed my hand. "That's all any of us can hope for, isn't it? To understand our mistakes, to find a way forward despite them." As the sun began to set over the gardens, casting long shadows across the newly planted beds, I thought about the journey of the past year, from loss to discovery, from betrayal to tentative reconciliation, from inheritance stolen to legacy reclaimed. What my sister had taken through deception, I had rebuilt through determination and faith in my father's vision. The true inheritance, I realized, wasn't the physical property or the company itself, but the values that had guided their creation: integrity, compassion, community, purpose. And that inheritance couldn't be stolen. It could only be embraced or rejected, honored or abandoned. Rebecca had temporarily lost sight of it, but perhaps in time, she might find her way back to the principles that had meant so much to our father. As for me, I had found my place at last. Not in Cambodia or Chicago, not in rebellion or conformity, but in the balance between business success and social purpose that Dad had always embodied. I had come home in the truest sense, not to a physical place, but to the values that made life meaningful. The grandmother's letter that had revealed so much had done more than expose Rebecca's deception. It had illuminated a path forward, had connected me to my father's deepest hopes for his legacy. And while that revelation had indeed left Rebecca temporarily homeless in all senses of the word, it had also, unexpectedly, opened a door to her eventual redemption. As darkness fell and lights came on around the community gardens, illuminating pathways and gathering spaces where neighbors chatted and children played, I felt Dad's presence more strongly than I had since his death. Not as a ghost or a memory, but as a living influence, in the gardens he'd envisioned, in the community forming around them, in the company now recommitted to his principles, and even in the sister who was slowly finding her way back to the values he'd tried to teach us both. Some inheritances, I realized, can never truly be stolen. They live on in choices made, in values honored, in legacies sustained not through possession, but through purpose. 5 years had passed since that snowy funeral day when Rebecca had announced her intention to take everything. 5 years of transformation, challenge, and unexpected growth. The Collins family legacy had evolved in ways none of us could have anticipated when the battle for inheritance began. The morning light streamed through the tall windows of what had once been Dad's study at Pinecrest Manor. The mansion now served as headquarters for the Thomas Collins Foundation, its stately rooms repurposed for meetings, workshops, and educational programs. I stood before the large map of Chicago hanging on the wall, red pins marking our completed community garden housing projects, blue pins indicating those in development. The North Side location is ready for groundbreaking next month, Ethan said, adding another blue pin to the map. Environmental approvals came through yesterday. And the funding? I asked, studying the growing constellation of pins spreading across the city. Secured. The success of the Westlake model has made investors significantly more enthusiastic about these projects. Ethan smiled wryly. Amazing how profitability changes perceptions about idealistic development concepts. I returned his smile, remembering the skepticism we'd faced when first proposing Dad's community-centered approach. He always said the numbers would work, if we were patient enough. Thomas was right about many things, Mom said, entering the study with a stack of folders. At 72, she showed no signs of slowing down, serving as the Foundation's outreach coordinator with remarkable energy. The grant applications for the school garden program are ready for your signature, Maya. I took the folders, noting Mom's meticulous organization, color-coded tabs, and neatly labeled sections. You've outdone yourself as usual. These educational initiatives matter, she said simply. Children need to understand where food comes from, how communities can support themselves. The education programs had become a cornerstone of the Foundation's work, teaching sustainable urban agriculture, financial literacy, and community development principles to audiences ranging from elementary school children to urban planning, graduate students. Surprisingly, this aspect of our work had become Rebecca's particular focus after her release from prison. Speaking of education, Ethan said, checking his watch, we should head over to the community center. Rebecca's giving the opening address for the summer internship program in 30 minutes. The drive from Pinecrest Manor to the Westlake Community Gardens took us through neighborhoods transformed by our development approach. Where once stood abandoned buildings or vacant lots, community-centered housing projects now thrived, each built around shared garden spaces and designed to foster connection rather than isolation. Collins Properties, still a for-profit development company, had shifted entirely to this model under my leadership. The financial success of Westlake had proven that ethical development could be profitable, attracting investors who appreciated both the social impact and the sustainable returns. We'd expanded beyond Chicago to Detroit, Milwaukee, and Cleveland, bringing the community garden housing concept to urban areas in need of revitalization. When we arrived at the Eleanor Collins Community Center, the main hall was already filled, with college students selected for the Foundation's prestigious summer internship program. These young people would spend 12 weeks learning every aspect of sustainable urban development, from architectural design to community organizing to financial structuring. Rebecca stood at the podium, looking composed and professional. Prison had changed her physically, the designer clothes and perfect styling replaced by a simpler, more authentic presentation. But the most significant changes were invisible. A humility that had replaced arrogance, a thoughtfulness where once had been calculation. Good morning, she began as the room quieted. Welcome to the 5th annual Thomas Collins Foundation Internship Program. You've been selected from hundreds of applicants because you share our commitment to transforming urban development, to creating communities rather than just buildings. I slipped into a seat at the back of the room, watching my sister command the audience's attention with the same natural charisma she'd always possessed, but now channeled towards something meaningful. My father believed that development wasn't just about profit margins, Rebecca continued. He understood that the true measure of success was creating spaces where people could connect, where they could put down roots both literally and figuratively. That vision nearly died with him, nearly was lost to short-sighted greed. She paused, and I knew what was coming next. Rebecca never shied away from acknowledging her past actions, using her own story as both cautionary tale and redemption narrative. "I should know," she said quietly. "I was the one who almost destroyed that vision. After my father died, I tried to redirect Colin's properties toward luxury developments, ignoring his explicit wishes for projects like the ones surrounding this community center. My sister Maya fought to preserve his true legacy, and I went to prison for fraud, embezzlement, and forgery." The room remained respectfully silent. Rebecca's history wasn't a secret. It had been front-page news in Chicago, but her willingness to address it directly always commanded respect. "I tell you this not to shock you, but because it illustrates the fundamental choice in development work. Will you create spaces that serve communities, or will you exploit them for maximum profit? Will you honor the land and its potential to nurture connection, or will you see it merely as square footage to be maximized?" As Rebecca continued outlining the internship program, I felt a complex mixture of emotions. Pride in what we had accomplished, gratitude for the unexpected journey that had brought us here, and a lingering sadness for what might have been if Rebecca had made different choices from the beginning. After the presentation, the interns broke into smaller groups for orientation sessions. Rebecca found me in the hallway outside the main room. "Good speech," I said. "You always know how to capture an audience." "Too dark?" she asked, a hint of her old insecurity showing through. "Sometimes I worry about leading with the prison story." "It's authentic," I replied, "and it gives context to everything we're doing here." She nodded, accepting the feedback. "The new crop looks promising. That architecture student from Detroit has already submitted preliminary designs for the Riverside project." Zoe mentioned her, said she reminds her of me at that age. Rebecca smiled faintly. Passionate, idealistic, slightly judgmental. Yes, I see the resemblance. The teasing was gentle, lacking the cutting edge it would have had years ago. Our relationship had evolved into something neither of us could have predicted. Not the uncomplicated sisterhood of childhood, nor the bitter enmity of the inheritance battle, but something more nuanced. A cautious alliance built on shared purpose and hard-won understanding. "Are you coming to the board meeting this afternoon?" I asked as we walked toward the community gardens. "We're reviewing the expansion proposals." "Wouldn't miss it," Rebecca replied. "I've reviewed the Detroit extension plans. The educational components need strengthening." Outside, the community gardens were alive with activity. Elderly residents tended raised beds adapted for accessibility. Children from the after-school program learned about pollination in the butterfly garden. Young mothers pushed strollers along the winding paths connecting the residential areas to the central green space. This vibrant community, now in its 5th year, had exceeded even Dad's original vision. The mixed-income housing remained fully occupied with a waiting list. The community-supported agriculture program supplied fresh produce to residents and local restaurants. The education center hosted workshops on everything from canning techniques to financial planning. "Ms. Collins!" A young woman waved from the children's garden plot. "The sunflowers we planted are already sprouting." I walked over to admire the neat rows of emerging seedlings, Rebecca following slightly behind. Interactions with residents sometimes still made her uncomfortable, the weight of what she had nearly done to this community creating an awkwardness she couldn't entirely shake. "They're growing beautifully," I confirmed. "Make sure to take progress photos for the scrapbook." The girl beamed with pride. "Ms. Rebecca is helping us create a presentation about the sunflower life cycle for the Harvest Festival." Rebecca looked surprised at being mentioned, but nodded. We'll be tracking growth rates and comparing different cultivation methods. As we continued toward the administrative offices, I glanced at my sister. You didn't mention you were working with the children's program. She shrugged, seeming embarrassed. Just a few hours each week. They needed someone to help with the educational components. This was new, Rebecca volunteering beyond her official foundation duties. Another small sign of healing, of finding her way back to contributing rather than taking. In my office overlooking the central gardens, Natalie waited with legal documents spread across the conference table. My wife had opened her own practice, specializing in sustainable development law, serving both Collins Properties and other firms adopting similar approaches. Perfect timing, she said as we entered. I was just reviewing the partnership agreement for the Cleveland project. Rebecca greeted Natalie with a warmth that had taken years to develop. Their relationship had evolved from adversaries to cautious colleagues to something approaching friendship, bound by their shared commitment to the foundation's work and to my happiness. Any concerns with the structure? Rebecca asked, examining the documents. Nothing significant, Natalie replied. The community benefit requirements are solidly embedded in the operating agreement. They can't be altered without unanimous consent. From all partners, including the foundation. Good, I said, joining them at the table. That was Dad's mistake with his earlier projects, not legally protecting the community components against future changes. A mistake I exploited, Rebecca acknowledged quietly. And one we've learned from, I added, not wanting to dwell on past wounds. The meeting proceeded efficiently, the three of us reviewing expansion plans, budget projections, and partnership structures. Rebecca's financial acumen, once used for personal gain, now strengthened our ability to create sustainable models. Natalie's legal expertise protected the community-centered approach against future challenges. My vision for how these projects could transform urban environments guided our growth strategy. When the review was complete, Rebecca gathered her materials. I should check on the interns. They're touring the greenhouse this afternoon. After she left, Natalie moved to stand beside me at the window overlooking the gardens. She's doing well, she observed. More engaged than I've seen her in months. The internship program energizes her, I agreed. Teaching others, passing on what she's learned, it gives her purpose. 5 years ago, would you have imagined this? Working alongside her to expand the foundation? I considered the question carefully. No. After what happened, I thought, we'd never speak again. I certainly never expected her to become integral to carrying forward Dad's legacy. Natalie slipped her arm around my waist. People can surprise you, sometimes even themselves. Later that afternoon, I made my way to the small private cemetery where Dad was buried. This weekly visit had become ritual, a quiet moment to reconnect with his memory, to share the progress of the work he'd inspired. The cemetery sat on a gentle hill overlooking the original Westlake property, allowing him to eternally watch over his vision brought to life. I wasn't entirely surprised to find Rebecca already there, placing fresh roses from the pine crest, gardens on the grave. Sorry, she said, starting to leave. I didn't mean to intrude on your time with him. Stay, I offered, patting the stone bench beside the headstone. It's not a competition anymore. She hesitated before sitting down, maintaining a careful distance between us. I was telling him about the internship program. The quality of students this year is exceptional. He would be proud of what you've created with the educational initiatives, I said. That combination of practical skills and ethical framework, it's exactly the approach he valued. Rebecca stared at the headstone, tracing the engraved words with her eyes. Thomas Collins, builder of communities, cultivator of connection. Do you think he would have forgiven me? She asked suddenly. If he could see what I did after he died? The question hung in the air between us. It wasn't the first time she'd asked it, but her need for reassurance on this point seemed undiminished by time. "Yes," I said finally. "I think he would have been disappointed, heartbroken, even. But Dad always believed in redemption, in the possibility of change. He would have recognized your efforts to make amends." She nodded, accepting this assessment. "Sometimes I dream about him," she admitted. "About trying to explain, to apologize. But in the dreams, he always walks away before I can finish." "That's your conscience, not Dad," I said gently. "He never walked away from difficult conversations." "No, he didn't." A small smile crossed her face. "Remember when I crashed his car in high school? He made me sit at the kitchen table for 3 hours discussing responsibility and consequences." "He was thorough," I agreed, remembering similar discussions during my own teenage rebellions. "But never cruel." We sat in companionable silence for a while, watching the golden afternoon light play across the community gardens below. Residents worked their plots, children played on the central green, neighbors chatted on shared porches. "I almost destroyed all of this," Rebecca said softly. "Out of greed, out of some misguided sense that I deserved more than you." "But you didn't succeed," I reminded her. "And now you're helping build it instead." "Because you gave me that chance," she acknowledged. "After prison, you could have shut me out completely. No one would have blamed you." "Maybe not," I conceded. "But then I would have failed Dad too, in a different way. He wanted us to work together, to balance each other. It just took a more difficult path than any of us anticipated." As we walked back toward the community center, Rebecca seemed lost in thought. Finally, she asked, "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if Grandma Eleanor hadn't sent that letter? If you hadn't found the codicil in her chest?" I had pondered this counterfactual many times over the years. "I think your luxury condo project would have gone forward," I answered honestly. "You might have been financially successful for a while. But eventually, the corners you were cutting, the ethical compromises, they would have caught up with you one way or another." "And you?" "I'd like to think I would have found another way to honor Dad's vision, even without the family resources. On a smaller scale, perhaps." Rebecca nodded thoughtfully. "So in the end, I might have destroyed myself anyway, but without the chance for redemption that came from being caught, from facing consequences. Possibly, we'll never know." "Then I suppose I should be grateful," she said with a hint of irony, that Grandma Eleanor was watching out for both of us in her way. The foundation board meeting that evening brought together the expanding network of partners in our community development work. Representatives from urban agriculture programs, affordable housing advocates, financial institutions focused on community, investment, and educational organizations filled the conference room at Pinecrest Manor. As chair of the board, I opened the meeting with our quarterly progress report. The Westlake model has now been successfully replicated in 4 additional Chicago neighborhoods and 2 Detroit locations, I reported. Occupancy rates remain above 95% across all properties, and the community agriculture programs are operating at capacity. "The waiting lists speak for themselves," added our housing director. "We're seeing demand across demographics: young, families, seniors, middle-income professionals, all drawn to the community-centered approach." "And the financial performance?" asked a representative from our primary lending partner. Ethan presented the figures, highlighting the sustainable returns that had made our model increasingly attractive to traditional investors. What began as philanthropic investment is now recognized as sound financial strategy with significant social benefits. Rebecca presented next, outlining the expansion of educational initiatives. "The internship program has become our most effective pipeline for identifying talent committed to our approach. 38% of our current project managers came through this program." As the meeting continued, I found myself reflecting on how far we had come from the contentious days after Dad's death. What Rebecca had intended to destroy had, instead, flourished, growing beyond even Dad's original vision. And ironically, she had become instrumental in its success. Her business acumen and organizational skills, once directed toward personal gain, now strengthening our collective impact. After the formal presentations, the board moved to the main decision point of the evening, expanding our model to a national scale through strategic partnerships with developers in other major cities. The proposal before us, I explained, would create a certification program for community garden housing developments meeting our established criteria. Developers would receive technical assistance, favorable financing terms, and marketing support in exchange for adhering to our standards for affordability, sustainability, and community engagement. Rebecca added, "This approach allows us to scale our impact without directly managing each project. The Thomas Collins Foundation would serve as the standards keeper and knowledge hub, while local developers implement the model with adaptations appropriate to their specific communities." The discussion was thoughtful and nuanced, board members raising important questions about maintaining quality control, ensuring genuine community benefits, and protecting against dilution of our core principles. Near the end of the discussion, Mom spoke up from her place at the table. "I've been thinking about what Thomas would say about this proposal," she began, her voice strong despite her years. "He always took the long view, always considered how decisions would affect not just next year but the next generation." All eyes turned toward her, this woman who had known Thomas Collins better than anyone, who had supported his vision from the beginning, and who had survived the painful fracturing of her family only to see it gradually, imperfectly heal. "I believe he would see this national expansion as the natural evolution of his work," she continued. "He understood that true change requires both depth and breadth, intensive local impact and wider systemic influence. This proposal offers both." The board voted unanimously to approve the national expansion strategy, with implementation to begin immediately. As the meeting adjourned and members began to disperse, Rebecca approached me with an uncharacteristic hesitancy. "There's something I'd like to discuss," she said quietly. "Privately, if you have a moment." Intrigued, I led her to Dad's old study, now my office when working from the foundation headquarters. The room retained much of his personal touch: the wall of family photos, the collection of architectural books, the worn leather chair where he'd spent countless evenings reviewing plans and proposals. Rebecca closed the door behind us, then reached into her portfolio to withdraw a thick envelope. "I've been working on this for several months," she said, handing it to me. "It's a proposal for a new initiative." Inside the envelope, I found a detailed plan for what she called the Restoration Project, a program designed specifically for formerly incarcerated individuals returning to communities where Collins' properties had developments. It would provide tiered housing options, employment training focused on urban agriculture and green building maintenance, financial literacy education, and community integration support, Rebecca explained as I reviewed the materials. The foundation would partner with criminal justice reform organizations and employers committed to second chance hiring. I looked up from the proposal, struck by both its thoroughness and its personal significance. This wasn't just another foundation initiative. This was Rebecca directly addressing her own experience, creating pathways for others facing similar challenges of reintegration after incarceration. "This is remarkable," I said genuinely. "The comprehensive approach, the focus on dignity and agency rather than charity. It aligns perfectly with Dad's philosophy." "I understand these barriers in ways others might not," she replied simply. "The practical challenges of rebuilding a life after prison, the psychological hurdles of rejoining communities where your past actions are known." "Have you discussed this with anyone else?" I asked, still processing the depth of the proposal. "Just Natalie, for the legal framework," Rebecca admitted. "I wanted your reaction before taking it further. It would represent a significant expansion of our mission." But a natural one, I noted, echoing Mom's earlier comment about evolution. Extending our community-building approach to those most often excluded from community. Exactly. For the first time in our conversation, genuine enthusiasm broke through Rebecca's careful professional demeanor. We talk about these developments creating belonging, fostering connection. Who needs that more than people trying to restart their lives after incarceration? I studied my sister, this woman who had tried to steal my inheritance, who had nearly destroyed our father's legacy, who had served time for her crimes, and who now sought to transform that painful experience into something that could help others. The journey she had traveled was extraordinary, from self-serving ambition to genuine service. I'll need to review the details more thoroughly, I said. But conceptually, I'm fully supportive. Let's plan to present it at next month's program. Committee meeting. Relief and gratitude flickered across her face. Thank you. This matters to me. I can see that, I replied. And it should matter to all of us. It's the logical extension of what we're trying to build. Communities where everyone has a place, everyone can contribute. As Rebecca left the study, I remained at Dad's desk, contemplating the unexpected turn our family story had taken. The sister who had tried to erase me from our father's legacy was now proposing initiatives that would expand and deepen that legacy in ways neither of us could have imagined 5 years ago. Later that evening, I returned home to find Natalie, waiting on our front porch, 2 glasses of wine already poured, watching the sunset over the community gardens visible from our modest house near the Westlake property. Successful board meeting? She asked as I joined her. Very. National expansion approved unanimously. I took a sip of wine, letting the day's tensions begin to dissolve. Rebecca showed me her proposal for the restoration project. Natalie nodded. I thought she might. She's been working on it obsessively for months. You helped with the legal framework? Just the basic structure, Natalie clarified. The vision is entirely hers. She's been interviewing formerly incarcerated individuals, meeting with experts, in re-entry programming, studying best practices across the country. It's remarkable work, I acknowledged, and deeply personal. That's what makes it powerful, Natalie observed. She's translating her own experience into systemic change, using what she learned from her fall and rehabilitation to create pathways for others. I thought about this as we watched residents returning home from work, greeting neighbors, checking on community garden plots before dinner. The development had matured beautifully, trees growing taller, relationships deepening, children who were toddlers when the project opened now riding bikes along the paths. Sometimes I still can't believe how things turned out, I admitted. When I think about that day at Dad's funeral, watching Rebecca announce she was taking control of everything, I never imagined we'd end up here. Working together to expand his vision rather than fighting over who controls it, Natalie concluded. Exactly. And in some ways, the conflict, painful as it was, ultimately strengthened that vision. Would we have been as intentional about legally protecting the community components of these developments if Rebecca hadn't tried to eliminate them from Westlake? Probably not, Natalie conceded. Sometimes our greatest insights come from our biggest challenges. The next morning found me back at the Westlake Community Center, meeting with the architects designing our Cleveland project. The session was productive, the team incorporating lessons from our previous developments while adapting to the specific needs of the Cleveland neighborhood. As the meeting concluded, Zoe appeared at the door. Sorry to interrupt, but there's someone here to see you. Says it's important. To my surprise, Jason, Rebecca's ex-husband and former accomplice, stood in the reception area. I hadn't seen him since the trial 5 years earlier, where his testimony against Rebecca had helped secure her conviction while reducing his own sentence to probation and community service. Maya, he said, extending his hand somewhat uncertainly. Thank you for seeing me. Jason, I replied, shaking his hand briefly. This is unexpected. I know, I should have called first. He glanced around the community center, taking in the vibrant activity. Children's art classes, senior citizens playing chess, young mothers chatting while babies napped in strollers. This place? It's remarkable. Nothing like what we had planned. What can I do for you, Jason? I asked, not interested in reminiscing about the luxury condominiums that would have replaced this community space. I'm moving to Seattle next month, he said. Fresh start. But before I leave Chicago, there's something I needed to return to you. From his briefcase, he withdrew a worn leather portfolio, one I recognized immediately as having belonged to our father. I found this when cleaning out some old storage boxes, Jason explained. It must have been mixed in with Rebecca's things when everything fell apart. I accepted the portfolio, running my fingers over the embossed initials. TJC, Thomas James Collins. Have you shown this to Rebecca? I asked. Jason shook his head. I thought it should come directly to you, given everything that happened. Thank you for returning it, I said, genuinely appreciative despite my lingering discomfort with Jason's role in the inheritance battle. I want you to know, he added hesitantly, that I regret my part in what happened. I should have stood up to Rebecca, should have refused to participate in altering documents, in misleading your mother, in all of it. Why didn't you? I asked, the question direct but not accusatory. He considered this, seeming to search for an honest answer rather than a convenient excuse. Ambition, I suppose, and a kind of willful blindness. Rebecca was so convinced that she deserved to control everything, that her vision for Colin's properties was superior to your father's, and I wanted to believe her. It was easier, more profitable. This candid acknowledgement was more than I had expected. People make mistakes, I said finally. What matters is learning from them. That's generous of you, he replied. Rebecca is fortunate that you were willing to give her a second chance after prison. Not everyone would have done that. It wasn't about generosity, I clarified. It was about honoring Dad's wish for us to work together, to carry forward his legacy as a family. And it was about recognizing that Rebecca, for all her faults, has valuable skills and insights to contribute. Jason nodded, seeming to understand. Well, I won't take more of your time. I just wanted to return the portfolio and, I suppose, to apologize in person before leaving Chicago. After he left, I took the leather portfolio to my office, curious about its contents. Inside were architectural sketches, handwritten notes, and photographs, Dad's preliminary work, on various projects from throughout his career. Among them, I found several pages devoted to the Westlake property, dating back nearly 20 years. Dad had been developing his community garden housing concept for far longer than any of us had realized, refining it gradually, incorporating new ideas about sustainable design and community engagement as they emerged. Most surprising was a letter tucked into the back pocket, addressed to my daughters, and dated just weeks before his death. With trembling fingers, I unfolded it. Rebecca and Maya, it began. If you're reading this, I'm no longer here to guide Colin's properties into its next chapter. This responsibility now falls to both of you, and I have absolute faith that together, you will achieve something remarkable. Rebecca, your business acumen, your attention to detail, your ability to navigate complex negotiations, these skills are essential to the company's continued success. But without a clear moral compass, without a commitment to creating genuine value for communities, these same talents can become destructive forces. Maya, your compassion, your vision for how development can serve human needs, your willingness to challenge conventional thinking, these qualities must inform every project Collins undertakes. But without practical implementation, without financial sustainability, even the most beautiful vision remains merely an unrealized dream. Together, you possess everything needed to take what I've built and transform it into something far greater. The Westlake Community Gardens project represents the direction I believe development must take in the coming decades, creating spaces where people can connect with nature and with each other, where environmental sustainability and human community reinforce one another. I've left specific instructions regarding Westlake in my will. This project belongs equally to both of you, requiring both your talents to fully realize its potential. My hope is that through this collaboration, you will discover a new way of working together, honoring your differences while finding common purpose. Remember always that buildings rise and fall, profits come and go, but the communities we help create, the connections between people, the relationships with the land, these endure. This is the true legacy of Collins Properties, and I entrust it now to both my daughters. With all my love and confidence, Dad. Tears streamed down my face as I read and reread the letter. Dad had seen so clearly what we needed, both as business partners and as sisters. He had understood Rebecca's strengths and her vulnerabilities, had recognized my vision and its limitations, had believed in what we could accomplish together despite our differences. The tragedy was that Rebecca had been unable to accept this balanced partnership, had instead sought to claim everything for herself. The miracle was that after all that had happened, the betrayal, the legal battle, Rebecca's imprisonment and subsequent redemption, we had ultimately found our way to precisely the collaboration Dad had envisioned. I picked up my phone and called Rebecca. "Are you still at the foundation?" I asked when she answered. "Just finishing up some paperwork." "Why?" "I need to show you something. It's important." 20 minutes later, Rebecca sat across from me in my office, reading Dad's letter with an expression of increasing emotion. When she finished, she carefully folded it and returned it to the portfolio. "He saw all of it," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "My strengths and my flaws. The danger of what I might become without your influence. And he understood what I would need from you," I added. "The practical implementation, the financial structure to support the vision." "And yet I rejected the partnership he wanted," Rebecca said, the regret evident in her voice. "I tried to push you out completely, convinced I could do it all myself. But here we are," I pointed out gently. 5 years later, doing exactly what he hoped we would do, combining your business skills with my community vision to create something neither of us could have built alone." "After I nearly destroyed everything," she reminded me. "Yes," I acknowledged. "The path was far more difficult than it needed to be. But maybe that's part of why it works now. We both had to lose something, had to be humbled in different ways, before we could truly appreciate what Dad was trying to create." Rebecca stood and walked to the window overlooking the community gardens. The afternoon sun illuminated the scene below, families gathering at picnic tables for an outdoor meal, children playing on equipment built from sustainable materials, elderly residents teaching younger neighbors about traditional gardening techniques. "Do you think he would be proud?" she asked quietly. "Of what we've created here, of what the foundation is becoming." I joined her at the window. "Yes, not just of the physical development, but of how we've found our way back to his original vision, each in our own way, each contributing what we do best." "And of me?" she pressed, the question hanging in the air between us. "After everything." "I did?" I considered this carefully, wanting to be honest rather than merely kind. "I think he would be proud of your journey," I said finally. "Not of the choices that led to prison, obviously, but of how you've used that experience, of how you've redirected your talents toward something meaningful. The restoration project. Proposal alone demonstrates a depth of understanding and purpose that would have moved him deeply." Rebecca nodded, accepting this assessment. "It's strange," she mused. "If someone had told me 5 years ago that losing everything, the company leadership, my freedom, my reputation, would ultimately lead to the most fulfilling work of my life, I would have thought they were delusional. Sometimes we have to Lose what we think matters to discover what actually does, I suggested. A painful lesson, she acknowledged, but one I needed to learn. We stood together in companionable silence, watching the community below. This living testament to our father's vision, nearly destroyed by greed, but ultimately realized through reconciliation and shared purpose. The stolen inheritance had been restored, not just to me but to its intended purpose. The letter Grandma Eleanor had sent, revealing Rebecca's deception, had indeed left my sister temporarily homeless in every sense, stripped of position, freedom, family connection. But that devastating loss had created space for something new to grow, a more authentic identity, a genuine commitment to values she had once dismissed as idealistic and impractical. As for me, the overseas volunteer who had returned to find her inheritance stolen, I had gained far more than property or position. I had discovered a capacity for leadership I hadn't known I possessed, had built a life centered around purpose rather than possession, had even found love with Natalie, amid the chaos of legal battles and corporate restructuring. Most unexpectedly, I had recovered a sister, not the childhood playmate of our youth, or the ruthless competitor of our early adulthood, but a more complex, chastened, and ultimately more authentic version of Rebecca. Our relationship remained complicated, marked by the scars of past betrayal, but also by a hard-won mutual respect and shared commitment to our father's legacy. We should present Dad's letter at the national expansion launch, Rebecca suggested suddenly. Let partners across the country understand the philosophy behind this approach, the balance between business viability and community benefit. That's a good idea, I agreed. It captures the essence of what makes these projects work, not just the physical design or financial structure, but the underlying values. Rebecca checked her watch. I should go. I'm meeting with the first, cohort of restoration project participants this evening, getting their input on the program design before we present it to the board. Let me know how it goes, I said. And Rebecca, thank you for creating that program. It's exactly the kind of initiative Dad would have championed, seeing potential where others see only problems. A shadow of emotion crossed her face, pride, mingled with lingering regret. It feels like the right way to use my experience, to make something constructive from my mistakes. After she left, I returned to Dad's desk, the leather portfolio open before me. The letter we had discovered today added another layer to our understanding of his vision, his hopes for his daughters, his belief in what Colin's properties could become. The inheritance my sister had tried to steal had been transformed into something far more valuable than either of us had initially understood. Not just buildings or balance sheets, but a living legacy of community, connection, and purpose that would outlast any physical structure. Outside the window, residents gathered in the community gardens as evening approached. Children harvested vegetables for family dinners. Neighbors shared tools and gardening advice. Elderly residents watched from benches, offering wisdom accumulated over decades of growing and tending. This was the true inheritance Thomas Collins had left his daughters, not just property to possess or a company to control, but a vision to fulfill, values to uphold, a way of creating spaces where human connections could flourish alongside careful stewardship of the land. Rebecca had temporarily lost sight of this inheritance, blinded by ambition and a narrow definition of success. I had nearly lost access to it through her deception. But Grandma Eleanor's letter had revealed the truth, had set in motion a chain of events that ultimately led us both back to the legacy our father had actually intended to leave us. 5 years after that snowy funeral day when Rebecca had announced her intention to control everything, we had found our way, through conflict, separation, and eventual reconciliation, to the partnership Dad had envisioned all along. Not perfect, not without tension, but genuine and increasingly effective. The community garden housing projects spreading across Chicago and beyond represented the physical manifestation of that partnership. Rebecca's business acumen ensuring their financial sustainability, while my community-centered vision shaped their purpose and design. Together, we were building something neither could have created alone. As twilight settled over the gardens, I gathered my things to head home. Tomorrow would bring new challenges: the Cleveland project breaking ground, the national expansion, strategy moving forward, Rebecca's restoration project proposal going to the board. But tonight, I simply wanted to appreciate how far we had come. How completely Dad's vision had been not just preserved, but expanded. Walking through the community gardens on my way home, I stopped to help an elderly resident harvest the last of her tomatoes before the evening chill set in. "These gardens saved me," she told me as we worked side by side. "After my husband died, I was so alone in our old apartment. Here, I have purpose each morning. I have neighbors who check on me. I'm teaching these young families how to grow food like my parents taught me." "That's exactly what my father hoped would happen here," I replied, carefully placing ripe tomatoes in her basket. "He must have been a special man," she said, "to see the value in bringing people together around growing things." "He was," I agreed. "And he would have loved meeting you, hearing your stories." As I continued toward home, I passed Rebecca's car still parked near the community center. Through the large windows, I could see her meeting with a small group, presumably the formerly incarcerated individuals helping shape the restoration project. She was listening intently as a young man spoke, nodding occasionally, taking notes. The sight filled me with unexpected emotion: pride in her growth, gratitude for her contributions, a lingering sadness for the years lost to conflict. The sister who had stolen my inheritance had, through her own painful journey, found her way back to our father's true legacy. And I, who had fought so hard to reclaim what was rightfully mine, had discovered that the most valuable inheritance couldn't be stolen or possessed, only shared, cultivated, and passed forward. At home, I found Natalie on our front porch, case files set aside as she watched the final moments of sunset over the community gardens. "You'll never guess what Jason brought by today," I said, joining her on the porch swing. "The prodigal ex-husband. Returns?" she commented. "What did he want?" I showed her Dad's leather portfolio, explaining how Jason had found it among Rebecca's old belongings. Together, we read the letter again, Natalie's legal mind noting the clear intention behind Dad's words. "This confirms everything," she observed. "Thomas always intended for you and Rebecca to lead together, to balance each other's strengths and weaknesses. And after everything that happened, that's essentially where we've ended up," I marveled, "just through a much more difficult path than necessary." "Speaking of difficult paths," Natalie said, "I saw Rebecca meeting with the restoration project advisors when I drove past the center. How's that initiative developing?" "Remarkably well," I admitted. "She's created something truly meaningful, a program that combines housing, employment, community integration, all designed specifically for formerly incarcerated individuals. It's comprehensive, practical, and deeply respectful of their dignity and agency." "Using her own experience to create systemic change," Natalie nodded approvingly. "That's genuine redemption." "It is," I agreed. "And it makes me think about Grandma Eleanor's letter, the one that started this whole journey by revealing Rebecca's deception. At the time, it seemed like it was just about exposing the truth, about ensuring Dad's wishes were honored. But looking back, I wonder if Grandma understood something deeper." "What do you mean?" "Maybe she saw that Rebecca needed to face consequences to find her way back to her better self. That without that intervention, she would have continued down a path that was ultimately destructive, not just to the company or to me, but to her own character, her own potential." Natalie considered this thoughtfully. "So the letter that left her temporarily homeless, in every sense of the word, might have been an act of tough love rather than just justice." "Perhaps," I said. "Grandma Eleanor knew Rebecca better than most people. She saw beyond the perfect facade to the insecurity and ambition driving her. Maybe she understood that only by losing everything Rebecca thought she wanted could she discover what she truly needed. The porch light came on automatically as darkness fell completely, illuminating the quiet street where neighbors walked dogs and children reluctantly headed inside for dinner and homework. This ordinary community life, people connected to each other and to place, represented everything Dad had valued, everything he had tried to build through Colin's properties. 5 years, I mused, leaning against Natalie's shoulder. Sometimes it feels like everything has changed since that funeral day, and sometimes it feels like we've simply found our way back to where we were always meant to be. Both can be true, she observed. The path matters as much as the destination. What you and Rebecca experienced, the conflict, the separation, the difficult reconciliation, shaped how you understand and value what you're building now. The following morning, I arrived at the foundation offices to find Rebecca already there, working intensely at her computer. The meeting with restoration project advisors had clearly energized her. "I've been revising the proposal based on their feedback," she explained, barely looking up as I entered. "Their insights are invaluable, practical barriers I hadn't considered, opportunities I'd missed." "Any major changes to the framework?" I asked, setting down coffee for both of us. "Expanding the employment training component," she replied, accepting the coffee gratefully. They emphasized that stable housing is essential, but insufficient, without meaningful work. And they suggested a peer mentorship structure, having program graduates guide newer participants through the transition. Her enthusiasm was genuine, her focus complete. This wasn't the calculating businesswoman who had once seen development purely in terms of profit margins and personal status. This was someone using her considerable talents to solve real problems, to create genuine opportunities for people society often discarded. "I plan to present this to the program committee next month," she continued. "But I'm wondering if we should accelerate the timeline. The need is urgent, and we've already identified suitable properties in 3 neighborhoods. If you can, have the revised proposal ready by next week. I'll call a special committee meeting," I offered. "No reason to delay if the framework is solid." She looked up, surprised by my support. "Really? You don't think we should take more time with this?" "The foundation's purpose is to implement Dad's vision of community-centered development," I reminded her. "This program aligns perfectly with that mission, addressing a population that desperately needs exactly the kind of supportive community environment we create." "Why wait?" Rebecca smiled, a genuine expression of gratitude rather than the perfect, practiced smile she had once used as a business tool. "Thank you. I'll have it ready by Monday." As I turned to leave, she added, "Oh, and Maya? I showed Mom the letter from Dad last night. She wants to host a family dinner this weekend to discuss how we might use it as part of the national expansion messaging." "I'd like that," I said. "Natalie too?" "Of course. 7 o'clock Saturday at her condo? She's already planning the menu." This casual exchange about family dinner plans would have seemed impossible 5 years earlier, when Rebecca had systematically excluded me from both the company and our family circle. The journey from that bitter estrangement to this tentative but genuine reconnection had been long and often painful, marked by court cases, prison visits, and gradually rebuilding broken trust. Yet here we were, sisters again, not with the uncomplicated relationship of childhood, but with a more mature connection founded on shared purpose and hard-won understanding. The inheritance Rebecca had tried to steal had ultimately become something we shared, something that had meaning precisely because it connected us to each other and to our father's enduring vision. That weekend, Mom's dinner table became a place of unexpected healing as we discussed Dad's newly discovered letter and its implications for both our family and the Foundation's work. "I always knew he wanted you to work together," Mom said, serving the roast she'd prepared using vegetables from the community gardens. "Even as children, He saw how your different strengths could complement each other. Rebecca organized while Maya imagined. Rebecca calculated while Maya connected. He saw us more clearly than we saw ourselves, Rebecca acknowledged. I was so convinced I should be in charge of everything, so dismissive of Maya's contributions. And I sometimes undervalued the practical implementation, the financial structure needed to sustain vision, I added. Dad understood we needed both. We spent the evening planning how to incorporate his letter into the national expansion launch, not just as family history, but as the philosophical foundation for the community garden housing model being adopted across the country. As Natalie and I drove home later that night, she observed, "That felt like a real family dinner, maybe for the first time since Thomas died." It did, I agreed. Still complicated, still with undercurrents of old pain, but genuine. Mom seemed happier than I've seen her in years. Having both her daughters working together, carrying forward her husband's legacy, it's what she's wanted all along, Natalie noted. The national expansion launch took place 3 months later on the 5th anniversary of the Westlake Community Gardens opening. Representatives from 15 cities gathered at the Eleanor Collins Community Center to learn about implementing the model in their own communities. Standing at the podium together, Rebecca and I presented the history and philosophy behind the development approach our father had pioneered and that we had refined through practical experience. This model works because it addresses fundamental human needs, I explained to the audience of developers, community organizers, and government officials. Not just for shelter, but for connection to each other and to the natural world. And it works financially, Rebecca added, because it creates sustainable value rather than extracting maximum short-term profit. These developments maintain high occupancy rates, build community wealth, reduce maintenance costs through resident engagement, and appreciate in value over time. Together, we unveiled the Thomas Collins Community Development Standards, the framework that would guide partners implementing this approach across the country. As the core philosophical statement, we included excerpts from Dad's letter, his vision of development serving community needs while remaining financially viable. After the formal presentation, as participants toured the gardens and residential areas, Rebecca and I found ourselves standing at the edge of the central green space, watching children play on equipment built from sustainable materials. Dad would have loved this, Rebecca said quietly. Not just Westlake itself, but seeing his approach spreading to other cities, becoming a movement rather than just a single project. And he would have been especially proud that we're doing it together, I added. That we found our way to the partnership he envisioned, even if through a much more difficult path than he intended. Rebecca nodded, watching the community in action around us, neighbors chatting as they tended garden plots, seniors teaching children traditional preservation techniques in the community kitchen, families gathering for a potluck dinner on the shared patio. You know what I've been thinking about lately? She said, her voice thoughtful. That day at Dad's funeral, when I announced I was taking control of everything. I was so certain that was what success looked like. Power, control, status. I couldn't see that what Dad had built was about connection, not possession. And now? Now I understand that true legacy isn't about owning things or controlling people. It's about creating something meaningful that continues beyond you, that improves lives in ways that ripple outward. She gestured to the vibrant community around us. This is success. Not my name on a building or my face on a magazine cover, but people finding belonging, purpose, connection. As the sun began to set over the community gardens, casting long shadows across the carefully tended plots where neighbors worked side by side, I thought about the journey that had brought us here. From that snowy funeral day when Rebecca had announced her intention to take everything, through the bitter legal battle and her imprisonment, to this moment of shared purpose and cautious reconciliation. The grandmother's letter that revealed, Rebecca's deception had indeed left her temporarily homeless, stripped of position, freedom, reputation, family connections. But that devastating loss had created space for something new to grow, a more authentic identity, a genuine commitment to values she had once dismissed. As for me, the sister who had been overseas when the inheritance was stolen, I had gained far more than I had initially fought to reclaim. Not just leadership of Collins Properties or the successful Westlake project, but a clear purpose, a meaningful path forward, and a deeper understanding of legacy that went beyond buildings and balance sheets. Together, Rebecca and I had eventually found our way to the partnership Dad had envisioned, each contributing our unique strengths to build something neither could have created alone. The inheritance that had been temporarily stolen had been restored, not just to its rightful owner but to its intended purpose. As darkness fell and lights came on throughout the community gardens, illuminating pathways and gathering spaces where neighbors continued their evening activities, Rebecca and I walked back toward the community center where the national expansion partners were gathering for dinner. "Ready?" I asked, pausing at the entrance. "Ready," she confirmed, straightening her shoulders. "Let's build something Dad would be proud of. Not just here, but everywhere." And together, we stepped forward to share the vision our father had entrusted to both his daughters, a legacy neither of us fully understood until we had nearly lost it, and that had ultimately brought us back to each other and to ourselves. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.